My stepson pushed me at the Christmas table. "This seat belongs to my dad," he spat at me. "Get out!" I fell to the ground in front of the whole family, my 72-year-old knees slamming against the hardwood floor I had paid for. But what he didn't know was that very night I would change his life forever. When he woke up the next morning, he would find 27 missed calls and a bank account that didn't just hit zero, it hit a reality check he could never afford. Before I tell you how I destroyed his little empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who signed the checks. My name is Booker Lewis. I am 72 years old, and for 40 years my name meant something in Atlanta. Lewis & Sons Construction wasn't just a company, it was the steel and concrete backbone of half the skyline in this city. I built it from nothing, mixing mortar with my own hands until my knuckles were permanently swollen. But tonight, standing in the foyer of the mansion on Tuxedo Road, I didn't feel like a CEO. I felt like a ghost. It was the first Christmas without Viola, my wife, the only woman I ever loved and the only reason there was peace in this house. She passed 6 months ago, and the silence she left behind was louder than any jackhammer I ever operated on a job site. I adjusted my tie in the hallway mirror. It was a simple black tie, conservative, unlike the flashy silk monstrosities my stepson Darius wore. I walked into the dining room. The chandelier, a crystal beast that cost more than my first house, cast a glittering light over the feast. There were about 20 people there. Friends of Darius, friends of his wife Tiffany. Not a single one of my old foremen or the people who actually built this life were present. Darius was laughing, holding a glass of my vintage Cabernet. He was 38 years old, handsome in the way a man is when he has never done a day of hard labor in his life. I took him in when he was 8 years old. I gave him my name Lewis because I didn't want the world to break him the way it tried to break me. I thought I was giving him a shield. Turns out I just gave him a weapon to use against me. I walked toward the head of the table. It was instinct. It was habit. For 30 years in our small apartment, and then in this big house, I sat at the head of the table. I carved the turkey. I led the prayer. I placed my hand on the back of the high-backed mahogany chair. Suddenly a hand clamped over my wrist. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was a grip meant to hurt. I looked up. Darius was staring at me, his eyes glassy with expensive wine and cheap arrogance. "Excuse me, Darius," I said, my voice low. "I'm going to sit down." "No, you're not," he said, his voice booming so that every conversation in the room stopped instantly. The clinking of silverware ceased. The room went dead silent. Even the Christmas carols playing softly in the background seemed to hold their breath. Darius smiled, a cruel twisting of his lips. "That chair is for the head of the family, Booker, and that's not you anymore." I looked at him confused. I looked at Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She was sitting to the right, scrolling on her phone, barely looking up, a smirk playing on her face. She was a 30-year-old Instagram model whose career peaked 5 years ago, and now her full-time job was spending the allowance I funneled into Darius's accounts. "I am the head of this family," I said, keeping my composure. "I bought this table. I bought this house. Now let go of my arm." Darius laughed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "You bought it, but my name is on the deed, old man. You put it in my name for tax purposes, remember? That makes it mine. And this chair, it belongs to my real dad." My blood ran cold. "Ray, come on in," Darius shouted toward the kitchen. The swinging door opened. Ray Jackson walked in. I hadn't seen Ray in 30 years, not since he abandoned Darius and his mother in a housing project with nothing but a pile of debts and a broken heater in the dead of winter. Ray looked older, his face puffy from years of cheap liquor, but he was wearing a suit that looked suspiciously like one of my old ones from the back of the closet. Ray strutted into the room like he owned the place. He winked at Darius. "Hey, son, looks like a nice spread," Ray said, his voice raspy. He walked right up to the head of the table. Darius looked at me, his eyes full of a hate I didn't understand. I had paid for his private schools. I had paid for his college. I had handed him the title of CEO of my company so he could feel like a man. And this is how he repaid me. "This seat belongs to my dad," Darius said again. "Get out." I didn't move fast enough. I stood my ground because a Lewis does not run. Darius didn't wait. He shoved me. He placed both hands on my chest and pushed with all his strength. I wasn't ready for it. My 72-year-old joints weren't ready for it. I stumbled back, my feet catching on the thick Persian rug. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the ceiling. I saw the crystal chandelier spinning. And then impact. I hit the hardwood floor hard. My lower back screamed in agony. My head bounced once against the wood, sending a flash of white light across my vision. My glasses skittered across the floor, sliding under the buffet table. For a few seconds I couldn't breathe. The wind had been knocked out of me. I lay there staring up at the underside of the table, listening to the gasps of the guests. "Oh my God," someone whispered. But nobody moved. Nobody rushed to help the old man on the floor. Darius stood over me, adjusting his cuffs. He didn't look sorry. He looked powerful. He looked like he had finally killed the king. Ray stepped over my legs and sat in the chair. He picked up the wine glass Darius had poured. "Nice floor," Ray chuckled. "Good for sleeping." I struggled to push myself up on my elbows. The pain in my hip was sharp, hot, and radiant. I looked toward Tiffany. Surely she would say something. Surely there was a limit to this madness. Tiffany held up her phone. The ring light attached to the case blinded me for a second. She was recording. Finally, a real family reunion she narrated to her 50,000 followers, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. No more negative energy. Goodbye to the third wheel. She panned the camera down to me lying on the floor, struggling to get my bearings. She zoomed in on my face, capturing my humiliation in high definition. "You look tired, Booker," she said, not looking at me, but looking at my image on her screen. "Maybe you should go back to your little apartment. We have a family dinner to enjoy." Darius sat down next to Ray. They clinked glasses. I slowly got to my knees. My dignity was the only thing keeping me upright. I grabbed the edge of the sideboard and pulled myself to a standing position. My suit was dusted with lint. My hip throbbed with every heartbeat. I looked at Darius. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that the wine he was drinking cost $500 a bottle, and he wouldn't know the difference between that and grape juice. I wanted to tell him that the suit he was wearing was paid for by the sweat I dropped pouring concrete in 1985. But I didn't say a word. Viola always told me, "Booker, silence is the loudest noise you can make when you hold the keys." And I held the keys. Not to the house. He was right, the house was in his name. I had done that to protect the asset from liability lawsuits years ago. A mistake. A fatal mistake born of love and trust. But Darius forgot who built the house. He forgot where the money came from to keep the lights on. I smoothed my jacket. I retrieved my glasses from under the table and put them on. One lens was cracked, a spiderweb fracture right across my line of sight. It made the world look broken. That was fitting. I walked to the door. Leaving so soon, Ray called out, his mouth full of my turkey. "Don't let the door hit you where the good Lord split you." Laughter. The table erupted in laughter. Darius laughed the hardest. I opened the heavy oak front door. The Atlanta winter air hit me like a slap, freezing the sweat on my forehead. It was snowing lightly, rare for Georgia. The flakes melted on my hot, angry skin. I walked down the long driveway. My driver wasn't there. I had told him to go home to his family for Christmas Eve. I was alone. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. My hand trembled not from the cold, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I pulled out my phone. I stopped under the street lamp at the end of the driveway, looking back at the house. The windows glowed with warmth. I could see their silhouettes moving inside. They were toasting. They were celebrating the exile of the old man. I looked at the screen of my phone. The voice memo app was still running. I had hit record the moment I stepped out of the car. I stopped the recording. 1 hour and 14 minutes. Every word, the push, the thud of my body hitting the floor, the insults, Ray's voice, Tiffany's mockery. It was all there, clear as a bell. I saved the file. I named it the end of Darius. Then I dialed a number. It was late, almost 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve, but the man I was calling would answer. He was paid to answer. "Sterling," I said when the line clicked open. "Booker, Merry Christmas, sir. Is everything all right?" "No, Sterling. Nothing is all right." I looked back at the house one last time. "Activate Clause 14. I said, my voice steady, cold as the ice forming on the pavement. There was a pause on the other end. "Sterling." My chief legal counsel for 30 years drew a sharp breath. "Clause 14, sir. That's the nuclear option. That strips the trademark. That freezes the operational accounts. That initiates the recall of all company assets. That will bankrupt the subsidiary within 24 hours. I know what it does, Sterling. I wrote it." "Are you sure, Booker, it's Christmas?" I touched my hip. It was throbbing. I thought about the crack in my glasses. I thought about Ray sitting in my chair drinking my wine, living the life I built for the son who just pushed me down. I have never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. Do it. And Sterling, yes, sir. Cancel his credit cards first. I want his morning coffee to be declined. I hung up the phone. I called an Uber. I stood in the snow, a 72-year-old man with a broken heart and a cracked lens waiting for a stranger to pick me up. They thought they had kicked an old dog out of the house. They didn't realize they had just let the wolf off the leash. Inside that house, Darius was probably feeling like a king. He thought he had won. He thought the house was the prize. He didn't understand that the house was just a pile of bricks. The prize was the name. The prize was the reputation. The prize was the money that flowed like blood through the veins of our business. And I was about to apply a tourniquet to the neck. When the Uber arrived, I got in the back. Where to, the driver asked. The Ritz-Carlton downtown, I said. I leaned my head back against the seat. I closed my eyes. I didn't cry. I had shed my last tear for Darius when I buried his mother. Tonight there was no room for sadness. There was only room for arithmetic. I started calculating. The cars, the club memberships, the insurance, the penthouse apartment Tiffany used as her office. By the time the sun came up, Darius Lewis would be the poorest man in Atlanta with $1 million mortgage. I watched the city lights blur past the window. "Merry Christmas, son," I whispered to the empty car. "Hope you enjoyed the turkey. It's the last thing I'm ever going to feed you." The city lights of Atlanta blurred past the window of the car, streaks of gold and red against the black canvas of the night. I sat in the back seat, my hand resting on my cane, feeling the vibration of the road beneath the tires. It was quiet in the car, but inside my head the noise was deafening. It was the sound of a memory I had tried to bury, a memory that was now clawing its way out of the grave. 30 years ago. That was the number. 3 decades since I walked into that crumbling apartment complex on the south side. The air had smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. I was 42 then, just starting to make real money, just starting to see my name on construction signs around the city. Viola had called me crying. She told me her ex was gone again and her boy was starving. I found Darius sitting on the stoop. He was 8 years old. He was skinny, his knees knobby and ash gray, wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too big that hung off his shoulders like a shroud. He looked at me with eyes that were too old for his face. Eyes that had seen too much yelling and not enough dinner. I didn't see a stranger's kid. I saw a project. I saw a foundation that needed pouring. I remembered kneeling down on the cracked pavement, ruining a pair of good slacks. I handed him a sandwich I had bought from the deli on the corner. He ate it so fast I thought he would choke. I put my hand on his shoulder. It was trembling. "Come on, son," I had said. "We are getting you out of here." He asked me if his dad was coming. I told him the truth. I told him that a father isn't the man who makes you, but the man who raises you. I took him home. I put a trowel in his hand before I put a baseball bat. I taught him how to mix mortar until the consistency was like thick peanut butter. I taught him that a wall is only as strong as the integrity of the man who lays the brick. I gave him my name, Lewis. I went to the courthouse, signed the papers, and paid the fees. I erased the name Jackson from his birth certificate because Jackson was the name of a man who left him to rot. I gave him Lewis because Lewis meant builder. Lewis meant honor. And tonight, 30 years later, he had pushed me onto the floor and told me the seat belonged to his dad. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. As the car turned onto Peachtree Street, my mind drifted back to the dining room I had just left. I could see it clearly, as if I were a fly on the wall watching the carnage continue. I knew exactly what was happening. I knew Ray. Ray Jackson was sitting in my chair right now. The leather was probably warm from my body heat, but he wouldn't care. He was likely holding the bottle of Chateau Margaux I had been saving for my 75th birthday. That bottle cost more than the car Ray drove to get there. He wouldn't even let it breathe. He would be chugging it like it was cheap liquor from a brown paper bag, spilling red drops onto the white tablecloth Viola had hand-stitched. I could hear his voice gravelly and wet with alcohol. He would be leaning forward, his elbows on the table, looking at the guests who were too polite or too drunk to leave. "That old man stole my family," Ray would say, gesturing with a turkey leg. "He came in flashing his money, thinking he could buy my boy. But blood is thicker than water, right, son and Darius?" My stomach churned at the thought of him. Darius would be nodding. He would be smiling that slick corporate smile I paid for with orthodontics and Ivy League tuition. He would raise his glass to the man who abandoned him, the man who only showed up because he smelled money in the water. "You are right, Dad," Darius would say. Booker never understood us. He was always about the work. He never understood family. Then the announcement would come. I knew it was coming. I had seen the mock-ups on Darius's tablet weeks ago but ignored them, thinking it was just a draft, a mistake. But now with the adrenaline fading and the cold reality setting in, I knew. Darius would stand up. He would tap his spoon against the crystal glass. He would look at Tiffany, who would be beaming her phone recording every second for her followers. "I have an announcement," Darius would say, his voice booming with unearned confidence. "It is time for a new era. We are rebranding. Lewis & Sons is the past. Starting January 1st, we are moving forward with a name that represents the true legacy of this family. We are becoming Darius and Father Construction. Darius and Father." He was erasing me. He wasn't just kicking me out of the house, he was scrubbing my name off the buildings I built. He was taking the reputation I spent 40 years sweating for and handing half of it to a man whose only contribution to his life was DNA and trauma. The car stopped. We were in front of a high-rise building downtown. It wasn't a hotel. It was my secret sanctuary. A penthouse apartment I bought 5 years ago under a shell company. Viola knew about it. It was our escape hatch, a place to go when the noise of the family got too loud. Since she passed, I hadn't stepped foot inside. Until tonight. I tipped the driver and stepped out. The doorman recognized me instantly despite the crack in my glasses and the dust on my suit. "Good evening, Mr. Lewis," he said, opening the door. "Good evening," I replied. "I need the elevator locked down after I go up." "No visitors." "Understood, sir." I rode the elevator to the top floor. My reflection in the polished brass doors looked tired. My skin was gray, my eyes weary. But behind the exhaustion, there was a fire. A cold blue flame that only burns when everything else has been consumed. The elevator doors opened directly into the living room. It was cold inside. The air was stale. Dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight cutting through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of Atlanta was breathtaking. I could see the skyline, the cranes, the steel skeletons of new buildings. I had built half of this view. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I knew exactly where I was going. I walked past the white leather sofas that had never been sat on. I walked past the kitchen that had never cooked a meal. I went straight to the study at the back of the apartment. On the wall behind a painting of a jazz saxophonist was a safe. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner. It beeped once, a sharp electronic sound in the silence. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside there was no money, no jewelry. I didn't keep cash here. I kept something more valuable. I reached in and pulled out a thick red accordion folder. The dust coated my fingertips. This was the red file. Years ago, when I first made Darius the CEO, Viola had grabbed my hand. She loved that boy, but she knew him. She knew he had a weakness for shiny things and a hollow spot inside him where his integrity should be. She made me promise to protect the company. She made me promise to protect myself. So I had my lawyers draft the contingency documents. I carried the folder to the mahogany desk. I turned on the small brass lamp. The yellow light illuminated the papers. I opened the file. On top was the trademark registration. The name Lewis & Sons Construction wasn't owned by the company. It was owned by me personally. Licensed to the company for a fee of $1 a year. A license that could be revoked at any time for conduct unbecoming. Below that was the deed to the headquarters, owned by me. Below that were the patent rights to our proprietary concrete mix, owned by me. And at the very bottom, the share structure. Darius thought he owned 51% of the voting stock. He did. But he didn't read the fine print of the transfer agreement. Those shares were Class B stocks. They had voting rights only as long as the holder remained in good standing with the board, and I was the chairman of the board. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11 p.m. Christmas Eve. Most lawyers would be asleep. Most lawyers would be with their families drinking eggnog and waiting for Santa. But Sterling wasn't most lawyers. Sterling was a shark who slept with his eyes open. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I dialed his private number. It rang twice. Booker Sterling's voice was crisp alert. "It is 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Tell me you are not calling to wish me happy holidays." "I'm not," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake like my hands had earlier. "I am at the penthouse," I continued. "I have the red file in front of me." There was a pause on the line. I could hear the rustle of sheets, perhaps him moving to a quieter room. The red file, Sterling repeated. "You want to go nuclear?" They pushed me, Sterling. Physically pushed me. And tonight, Darius announced he is changing the name of the company. He is bringing Ray Jackson in. Ray, the drunk. Sterling let out a low whistle. That isn't just a bad business move, Booker. That is suicide. He wants to be Darius and father, I said, staring at the papers. So I am going to let him be Darius and father, but they aren't going to do it with my assets. What do you need? Booker, activate Clause 14, I said. Clause 14. The revocation of the name. The immediate recall of all intellectual property. The freezing of the operating accounts pending a forensic audit. It will cripple the company, Booker Sterling warned. Construction sites will stop tomorrow morning. Suppliers will pull their trucks. The bank will call the loans. By noon tomorrow, Lewis & Sons will be a shell. It isn't Lewis & Sons anymore, I reminded him. It is Darius and father. Let them build their empire with their own bricks. I am taking mine back. I heard the sound of a laptop opening on the other end of the line. Keys clacking. I am logging into the court system now, Sterling said. I can file the emergency injunction electronically. It will be on the judge's desk by 7 a.m. The cease and desist will hit Darius's inbox by 7:01. Good, I said. And Sterling. Yes. The credit cards, the company cars, the phones. Cut it all. Tonight. Right now. If it has a chip in it and I pay for it, I want it dead. Consider it done. I am executing the kill switch on the corporate accounts as we speak. I watch the city lights through the window. Somewhere out there in that big house on Tuxedo Road, Darius was probably raising a glass to his new future. He was probably laughing at the old man he kicked to the curb. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was already turning to quicksand. One more thing, Booker Sterling said. What is it? The clause regarding the personal residence. The mansion. It is owned by the holding company, correct. That is correct. If we activate Clause 14, the lease agreement for the CEO becomes void immediately upon termination of the brand license. He is technically trespassing as of... Sterling paused typing. As of right now. I closed the red file. I ran my hand over the leather cover. Evict him, I said. On Christmas. Especially on Christmas. I hung up the phone. I sat in the dark office listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the other room. I was alone. I was 72 years old. I had no wife, I had no son. But as I looked down at my hands, the hands that had built skyscrapers and bridges, I realized something. I wasn't empty. I was just clearing the site. I was tearing down a condemned building so I could put something better in its place. I wasn't done building yet. And Darius was about to learn that you never ever fire the architect while the house is still under construction. The next morning would bring 27 missed calls, but tonight I was going to sleep like a baby. 7 o'clock in the morning. The sun was just beginning to bleed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, pale shadows across the room. I sat in a leather armchair that cost more than the first car I ever bought, a cup of black coffee in my hand. It was silent up here, peaceful, the kind of silence you can only afford when you have paid your dues to the world. But on the mahogany coffee table in front of me, my phone was having a seizure. It buzzed. It vibrated. It lit up the dim room with a relentless, frantic energy. The name on the screen was Darius. I didn't reach for it. I didn't turn it over to silence it. I just watched it dance across the polished wood, vibrating with the desperation of a man who has just realized the ground beneath his feet is not solid earth, but a trapdoor. I took a sip of coffee. It was hot, bitter, and strong. Just the way I like it. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end of that line. I didn't need to be there to see it. I had raised Darius. I knew his routine better than he knew himself. I knew that right now across town in the mansion on Tuxedo Road, the morning sun wasn't bringing warmth. It was bringing a reckoning. At 7 a.m. sharp, Darius usually ordered breakfast. He didn't cook. He didn't make toast. He ordered artisanal pastries and imported coffee from a delivery service that catered to the elite. He would be sitting in his silk robe, the one he bought with the company bonus I never authorized, scrolling through his tablet, waiting to be served. I closed my eyes and pictured it. He would have opened the app. He would have selected the $60 breakfast platter. He would have hit place order. And then the notification. Transaction declined. Please contact your financial institution. He would have frowned. He would have thought it was a glitch. Darius didn't believe in declined cards. In his world, money was a natural resource like air or water. It was just there. He would have tried again. Declined? He would have switched cards. He would have tried the company platinum card. the one he used to buy gas for his friends and dinners for his clients. Declined. Card deactivated by administrator. That was the moment the first bead of sweat would have rolled down his neck. That was the moment he realized the plastic in his hand was just plastic. Without my signature backing it, it was worthless. The phone on my table buzzed again. Missed call number 5. Then I heard it in my mind. The scream. It wouldn't have come from Darius. It would have come from the master bedroom. From Tiffany. Tiffany didn't get out of bed before 10, but she started her day on her phone. Amazon, Sephora, Nordstrom. She shopped like it was a competitive sport. She had carts full of clothes she didn't need and jewelry she wouldn't wear waiting for her to hit buy now the moment she woke up. I had linked her accounts to the household expense fund, another mistake born of generosity, another weakness I had allowed them to exploit. But last night, while I sat in the back of that Uber, I logged into the administrative portal. I didn't just remove the payment methods, I flagged the accounts for suspicious activity. I could imagine her staring at her screen, her perfectly manicured nails tapping furiously against the glass. Account suspended. Payment method invalid. She would be screaming my name, not Dad, not Booker. She would be calling me the old man. She would be yelling for Darius to fix it. Fix it. Darius. My cart is locked. Why is my card not working? And Darius, standing in the kitchen with a stomach growling for a breakfast that wasn't coming, would realize he couldn't fix anything. He couldn't fix a leaky faucet, let alone a frozen bank account. The phone buzzed again. Missed call number 12. I set my coffee cup down. I picked up the phone not to answer, but to look at the time. 7:15, right on schedule. Darius thought he was the CEO of Lewis & Sons. He walked around the office with his chest puffed out, sitting in the big chair signing the holiday cards. He thought power came from the title on the door. He never read the bylaws. He never read the fine print of the incorporation documents I updated 5 years ago when I had my first heart scare. I owned 51% of the company. But it wasn't just stock. It was Class A preferred stock. It didn't pay dividends. It didn't generate cash flow. It sat there dormant, invisible. But it had one feature, one specific nuclear feature: super voting rights. In matters of executive leadership and asset management, my 51% outvoted his 49% by a factor of 10 to 1. I held the veto power. I held the kill switch. Darius thought the company was his because I let him play with the steering wheel while I controlled the brakes. Last night, I didn't just tap the brakes. I slammed them to the floor. I had sent the email to the bank at midnight. By 6 a.m., the corporate accounts were frozen pending a forensic audit. Every penny flowing in or out of Lewis & Sons now required my biometric authorization. Darius couldn't buy a paperclip without my thumbprint. The phone buzzed again. Missed call number 20. He was panicking now. The reality was setting in. The hangover from the expensive wine was being replaced by the headache of insolvency. He was probably running through the house trying to find cash. He would look in the safe in the study. Empty. I had cleared it out months ago, leaving only a stack of Monopoly money as a joke he never found because he never opened the safe. He never needed to. He would be checking his pockets. He would find his wallet empty because he relied on the cards. He lived a cashless life because cash was for common people. Now he was less than a common person. He was a pauper in a palace. I watched the screen light up again. 27 missed calls. 27 times he tried to reach the man he pushed onto the floor. 27 times he tried to beg or threaten or scream at the man he kicked out of his own house. I took another sip of coffee. It was getting cold, but it still tasted like victory. Then I heard a sound from outside, not from my window, but in my imagination echoing from the driveway of the mansion on Tuxedo Road. It wasn't a phone ringing, it was a siren. I walked to the window of the penthouse and looked down at the city. Somewhere out there, a police cruiser was pulling up to the wrought iron gates of the estate. I had made a call to Detective Miller at 4 a.m. Miller was an old friend. I had built the precinct he worked in. I told him I wanted to report a theft, a grand theft auto. The Maybach S-Class parked in Darius's driveway, the car he drove to the country club, the car he polished more often than he called his mother when she was alive. It was registered to the company. It was a company asset designated for the use of the chairman of the board, me. I had let him drive it. I had let him pretend it was his, but the registration in the glove box said Lewis and Sons. And since I had terminated his employment status effective midnight, last night he was no longer an authorized driver. He was in possession of stolen property. I could see the scene unfolding, the red and blue lights flashing against the white columns of the house, the neighbors peeking through their curtains, whispering. The shame. Darius would open the door, phone in hand, still trying to call me. He would see the officers. He would try to use his charm. He would try to flash that smile that used to work on his teachers and his girlfriends. Officer, there must be a mistake. This is my car. I'm the CEO. And the officer would look at his clipboard and say, Sir, we have a report that this vehicle is being used without authorization by a terminated employee. We are here to seize the asset. Terminated employee. That phrase would hit him harder than the floor hit me. I watched the phone buzz one last time. Missed call number 28. Then it stopped. He must have seen the police. He must have dropped the phone. I turned away from the window. I walked to the kitchen and rinsed my cup. The day was just beginning. The sun was fully up now, burning away the morning mist. I wasn't done. The car was just the appetizer. The credit cards were just the wake-up call. I walked to the closet and pulled out my old work boots, the ones with the concrete dust still in the seams. I hadn't worn them in years. I usually wore Italian loafers now. But today, I felt like working. I put on the boots. I tied the laces tight. I wasn't going to the office to sit behind a desk. I was going to the job site. I was going to remind everyone from the foreman to the water boy whose name was on the sign. Darius was about to find out that a man who builds skyscrapers knows exactly how to bring them down. Controlled demolition. That's what this was. And I was the one holding the detonator. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator. My hip was stiff, but I walked tall. The pain was good. The pain was a reminder. As the elevator descended, I checked my phone one last time. One new voicemail from Darius. I didn't listen to it. I didn't need to hear his voice. I knew what he sounded like when he was scared. I heard it 30 years ago when I found him in that housing project. He was that little boy again, scared, hungry, alone. Only this time I wasn't coming to save him. 9 a.m. The morning rush at Lewis & Sons Construction was usually a symphony of controlled chaos. Project managers shouting into phones, architects rolling out blueprints, the smell of industrial coffee and ambition filling the air. I knew the rhythm of that lobby better than the beat of my own heart. I had designed it. I had picked the marble for the floors and the granite for the reception desk. Today I was watching it from a high-definition monitor in my penthouse. I took a sip of water. My throat was dry, but my hands were steady. I had the Zoom control panel open on my laptop. The feed from the lobby camera was crisp. There he was. Darius walked through the revolving doors like he was ready to fire half the staff. He wasn't wearing his usual bespoke suit. He was wearing yesterday's clothes, rumpled and stained with wine. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, a man running on caffeine and panic. He probably took a cab. Seeing him step out of a yellow taxi instead of the company Maybach was the first small victory of the day. He marched straight to the security turnstiles. He didn't look at the receptionist. Old Mrs. Gable, who had been with me since the garage days. He just pulled his platinum keycard from his pocket and slapped it against the reader. Beep. A harsh red light flashed. Darius frowned. He slapped it again, harder this time. Beep. Access denied. I leaned forward in my chair. This was the moment. The first crack in the glass. Darius looked around, annoyed. He tried a third time, grinding the plastic against the sensor. "Hey!" he shouted at the security desk. "My card is demagnetized. Open the gate." Standing behind the desk was Big Mike. Mike was 6'5", a former linebacker I had hired 10 years ago when he was down on his luck. Mike knew who signed the checks. Mike knew who built the building. Mike didn't push the button. He stepped out from behind the desk. He crossed his arms over his chest, a wall of muscle in a blue uniform. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir," Mike said. His voice was calm, deep, and loud enough to carry across the silent lobby. Darius's face turned a shade of red I had only seen once before when I told him he couldn't have a Ferrari for his 16th birthday. "Do you know who I am?" Darius spat, stepping into Mike's personal space. "I am the CEO of this company. I am Darius Lewis. Open the damn gate before I have your badge." "I am sorry, Mr. Darius," Mike said, not moving an inch. "But you are not on the access list." The lobby had gone quiet. Employees were stopping mid-stride. Phones were lowered. Eyes were widening. This wasn't just a technical glitch. This was a public execution. "What do you mean I am not on the list?" Darius screamed. "I make the list." "Not anymore," Mike said. The orders came from the chairman. Darius froze. The chairman. Me. He looked up at the ceiling as if he expected God to strike him down. In a way, he was right. I hit the button on my laptop. The massive LED screen behind the reception desk, usually reserved for displaying project renderings and stock prices, flickered to life. My face filled the screen. The sound of my own voice booming through the lobby speakers startled even me. "Good morning, everyone," I said. Every head turned. 200 employees from the interns to the senior VPs looked up at the giant screen. Darius spun around, his eyes wide with shock. "Dad," he whispered, but the microphone picked it up. I ignored him. I looked directly into the camera lens, addressing my people. "I want to apologize for the disruption this morning," I said, "but it is necessary to correct a grave error in leadership." Darius took a step toward the screen, his hands balled into fists. "What are you doing? Turn this off." Effective immediately, I continued, my voice rolling over his protests like a steamroller. "Darius Jackson is relieved of his duties as CEO. He has been terminated for cause." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Jackson." I had used his birth name. I had stripped him of the Lewis name in front of the people he tried to rule. Darius looked like he had been slapped. "That is my company. You can't do this." "I can, and I did," I said. "And more importantly, let me explain to everyone here why their bonuses were going to be light this year. Let me explain why we had to delay the Midtown project." I clicked another button. The screen split. On one side was my face, on the other was a spreadsheet, a forensic accounting of the last 3 years. It was the red file's ugly sister, the black ledger. I highlighted a row in bright yellow. $2.4 million, I read aloud. That is the amount of money Darius Jackson embezzled from the Materials Procurement Fund over the last 24 months. The lobby erupted in whispers. I saw the chief financial officer turn pale. He had signed off on those invoices thinking they were for high-grade steel. $2.4 million, I repeated. He didn't spend it on concrete. He didn't spend it on labor. I clicked again. Images appeared on the screen, scans of receipts, credit card statements. He spent it on a penthouse apartment for his wife Tiffany. He spent it on gambling debts for a man named Ray Jackson. He spent it on cars, jewelry, and vacations, while you, the people who actually work, were told there was no room in the budget for raises. Darius was shaking. He looked at the screen, seeing his secrets displayed in 4K resolution. He looked at the employees. The respect was gone. The fear was gone. All that was left was disgust. "You lied to us," someone shouted from the back. "It was Jenkins, a foreman who had been with me for 20 years. You told me we couldn't afford new safety gear." Darius backed away, holding his hands up. "It's not true. The old man is lying. He's senile. He's crazy. The bank doesn't lie." "Darius," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "The forensic audit started at midnight. The authorities have already been notified." Police Darius squeaked. "Embezzlement is a felony, son, and since you are no longer a Lewis, you don't get the family protection. You are just a man who stole from the people who build this city." I looked at Big Mike. "Mike, escort Mr. Jackson off the premises, and make sure he leaves his company phone and laptop at the desk." "With pleasure, sir," Mike said. He placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. It wasn't a suggestion. Darius tried to shake him off. "Don't touch me, Dad Booker. You can't do this. I am your son." I looked at him from the screen. My face was 10 feet tall, but my expression was stone. "I don't have a son," I said. "I had an investment, and I am liquidating it." Mike grabbed Darius by the arm and marched him toward the revolving doors. Darius struggled, his heels dragging on the marble floor he used to strut across. He was shouting, cursing, threatening to sue, but nobody was listening. The employees parted like the Red Sea, letting him pass, their eyes cold and hard. He was shoved out onto the sidewalk. The cold winter air hit him. The door spun shut behind him, locking him out of the kingdom. I cut the feed. The screen in the lobby went black. I sat back in my chair in the penthouse. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from exertion. Demolition is hard work. I watched the street camera feed now. Darius was standing on the curb, shivering in his thin suit jacket. He looked small. He looked like that 8-year-old boy I found in the projects, only this time he had no innocence left to save him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal phone. It was the only thing he had left. He dialed a number. I checked the call log on the family plan dashboard I still controlled. He wasn't calling Tiffany. He wasn't calling a lawyer. He was calling Ray. I tapped into the audio cloud. I could hear the call. Dad Darius's voice was trembling. Dad, pick up. It's bad. He locked me out. He knows about the money. There was a rustling sound on the other end, then a cough. Ray's voice came through thick with sleep and irritation. What are you talking about? Who cares? Listen, boy, I need $500. What? Darius asked, confused. $500, Ray snapped. My guy is here. I need my medicine. Transfer it to my Cash App. Now. Dad, listen to me. Darius screamed into the phone, people on the street staring at him. I don't have $500. He froze my accounts. He took the company. I'm on the street. There was a silence on the line, a long, heavy silence. You broke, Ray asked, his voice losing all warmth. I don't have cash right now, Dad. I need you to come get me. Bring the car. We need to figure this out. The car, Ray laughed. It was a cruel hacking sound. I sold the spare tire this morning for a bottle of vodka. If you ain't got money, Darius, you ain't got nothing for me. I got my own problems. Don't call me until you fix this. Click. Ray hung up. Darius stood there, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the deadline. He looked at the screen. He looked at the building behind him, the tower of glass and steel with my name on it. He tapped his banking app. I knew what he would see. Checking $0, savings $0, credit revoked. He checked his digital wallet. Balance negative 42.50 cents. He didn't even have enough money to buy a sandwich. I watched him slump against the cold brick wall of the building. He slid down until he was sitting on the pavement, his head in his hands. 30 years ago, I picked him up from a stoop just like that. I gave him the world, and he threw it away because he thought he deserved the chair without building the table. I closed the laptop. Hunger is a good teacher, I said to the empty room. It taught me everything I know. Let's see what it teaches you, Darius Jackson. 11 a.m. While Darius was sitting on the cold pavement outside the building I built staring at a negative bank balance, his wife was lying on a heated massage table at the sanctuary. It was the most exclusive spa in Buckhead, the kind of place where the air smelled of lemongrass and money, and the silence cost $5 a minute. Tiffany didn't know about Darius yet. She didn't know about the company. She didn't know that the Lewis Empire had just undergone a controlled demolition. She had her phone on silent, probably buried deep in her oversized Hermes Birkin bag, ignoring the world while she got an $800 gold leaf facial. I sat in the conference room of my penthouse, the red file open on the table. Across from me sat Sterling, my lawyer. He was typing on his laptop, his face illuminated by the blue light of legal warfare. We are ready for the next phase, Sterling said, not looking up. The repo team is 3 minutes out. I nodded. I took a sip of water. I watched the GPS tracker on my tablet. A black SUV was pulling up to the curb outside the sanctuary. The phone on the table buzzed. I looked at the caller ID. Tiffany. She must have just tried to pay. I looked at Sterling. He stopped typing. He leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. He nodded at the phone. I pressed the speaker button. Hello, Tiffany, I said. My voice was calm, almost bored. Old man, open the card right now, Tiffany shrieked. The audio distorted her voice, sharp enough to cut glass. I am standing at the front desk of the spa. My card was declined. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? I have a VIP client meeting in an hour. Fix it. Now. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask why I left the dinner. She just demanded. For 3 years, I'd been nothing but a wallet with a pulse to her. I looked at Sterling. He gave me a small, tight smile. I am afraid I can't do that, Tiffany, I said. What do you mean you can't? She snapped. Her voice dropped an octave, turning into that low, threatening tone she used on waiters and valets. Listen to me, Booker. I know you are senile, but try to focus. I need to pay this bill. Darius is going to hear about this. Darius already knows, I said. And Tiffany, you are on speaker. My attorney, Mr. Sterling, is listening. There was a pause, a hesitation, but her arrogance was a thick shield. It didn't crack easily. I don't care who is listening, she hissed. Transfer the money. Or are you forgetting who controls access to your granddaughter? You want to see the baby when it comes? You pay the bill. She was playing the pregnancy card, the grandchild card. It was a bluff. I knew it. She had been drinking wine last night. Tiffany, I said, my voice hardening into concrete. I think you are confused about the arrangement. You don't have a husband who is a CEO anymore, and you don't have a house. What are you talking about? She laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. I am going home to my penthouse. No, you are not, I said. I picked up a document from the table. It was a lease agreement. The penthouse on Peachtree was purchased by Lewis & Sons Construction as corporate housing for executive use, I read aloud. Clause 17 states that occupancy is contingent upon employment or the express written consent of the chairman. I paused. I let the silence stretch across the line. As of 10 minutes ago, that consent has been revoked. You are trespassing. The locks have already been changed remotely. Your keycard is a piece of plastic. You can't do that, she screamed. My clothes are there. My life is there. Your clothes were bought with embezzled funds, I corrected her. They are evidence. The police are currently sealing the apartment. I could hear the panic setting in now, the background noise of the spa, the soft music, the hushed voices seemed to amplify her hysteria. You are lying. You are a crazy old man. I am going to sue you. You can try, Sterling chimed in, his voice smooth as silk. But I would advise against it, Mrs. Lewis. Or should I say Ms. Miller? We are aware of the alias you used to open the offshore accounts. Tiffany went silent. The line crackled with her breathing. But the show wasn't over. I watched the GPS tracker on my tablet. The dot had stopped right at the front door of the spa. Tiffany, I said. Before you go, there is one more thing. What she whispered. You are holding company property. I tapped the screen on my end. I signaled the team. In the lobby of the sanctuary, the glass doors opened. 2 men walked in. They weren't police. They were asset recovery specialists. They wore dark suits and earpieces. They didn't look like they were there for a pedicure. I could hear the commotion through the phone. Ma'am, a deep voice said. Are you Tiffany Lewis? Get away from me, Tiffany shouted. Who are you? We are authorized agents for Lewis & Sons Construction, the voice said. We are here to recover misappropriated corporate assets. I closed my eyes and pictured the scene. The receptionist with her mouth open, the ladies in their robes staring. Tiffany cornered against the marble counter clutching her bag. The bag, the agent said, the Hermes Birkin. It was purchased with a corporate credit card on November 4th. It is listed as office supply storage. Hand it over. You are crazy. This is my purse, Tiffany shrieked. And the watch, the agent continued, relentless. The Rolex Daytona. Purchased October 10th. Listed as a client gift. It was never gifted. It is on your wrist. Hand it over. I listened to the scuffle, the sound of a struggle. Tiffany wasn't going to give up her status symbols without a fight. She lived for those logos. She believed they made her someone. Without them, she was just a girl from the suburbs who married the wrong mark. Don't touch me. Help. They are robbing me. Ma'am, the receptionist's voice cut in tight with embarrassment. Please, you are disturbing the other guests. Just give them the items and leave. Leave, Tiffany gasped. I haven't paid. Your card was declined, ma'am, the receptionist said coldly. And if you cause a scene, I will have to call the police. Police. That word again. It was the theme of the day. I heard the sound of a latch clicking, the heavy thud of a bag being placed on the counter, the metallic clink of a watch being unclasped and thrown down. Fine. Take it all, you vultures. Thank you, the agent said. The phone line went dead. She must have hung up, or maybe the phone was in the bag she just surrendered. I didn't care. I looked at Sterling. Did we get them? Sterling checked his messages. Assets secured. The bag and the watch are in custody. Estimated value $40,000. I leaned back in my chair. $40,000. That was a year's salary for some of my best workers, and she wore it to get a massage. But the walk of shame was just beginning. I switched apps on my tablet. I pulled up the ride-sharing administrative account, the one linked to the family plan. I saw a request pop up. Tiffany Lewis, location the sanctuary, destination the penthouse. She was trying to go home. She was trying to flee the scene of her humiliation. I hovered my finger over the decline button. Not today, I whispered. I canceled the ride. A second later, another request popped up. She was trying again. Canceled. I went into the settings. I removed her profile from the family plan. I blocked her number from the account. She was standing on the curb outside the spa. She had no car. Darius had taken the Maybach, which was currently being towed to the impound lot. She had no purse. She had no cash. She was wearing a silk robe she might have stolen from the spa, or maybe just her yoga clothes underneath. She was 5 miles from the penthouse. 5 miles of Atlanta pavement. I imagined her tapping her phone, watching the little car icons disappear, watching the payment method invalid error flash across her screen. She would look at her shoes, 6-inch heels, designer, painful. She would look down the street. No taxi would stop for a woman screaming at her phone. She had to walk. I stood up and walked to the window of my penthouse. I looked out over the city. I couldn't see her, but I could feel her. I could feel the blistering of her feet. I could feel the cold wind biting through her thin clothes. For years, she had walked all over me. She had walked over the carpets I paid for, walked through the doors I opened, walked past me like I was furniture. Today, she was going to learn what the ground felt like. Sterling closed his laptop. "That is the last of the immediate assets," he said. "The penthouse is sealed. The cars are seized. The accounts are frozen. They are liquidating their personal jewelry as we speak, but the pawn shops have been alerted to watch for stolen goods." "Good," I said. "What now, Booker?" "Now," I said, turning away from the window. "Now we wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to get hungry." I walked to the kitchen to pour another cup of coffee. The day was half over, but the lesson was just beginning. Tiffany was walking home to a locked door. Darius was sitting on a curb with empty pockets. Ray was probably passed out in my dining room waiting for a wake-up call from the sheriff. I sat down and took a sip. It tasted bitter like medicine. But medicine is what you take to get better. And this family was sick. I was just the doctor administering the cure. And the cure was poverty. Let them walk, let them starve, let them feel the weight of the world without my shoulders holding it up. I checked my watch. Noon. Lunchtime. I wondered what they would eat. Probably humble pie. It was the only thing on the menu today. 1 p.m. The cemetery was quiet save for the wind whistling through the Georgia pines. I stood over Viola's grave, my hand resting on the cold gray granite. I had brought her white lilies, her favorite. They looked bright and alive against the winter grass, a stark contrast to the death that surrounded me. I wasn't just surrounded by dead bodies. I was surrounded by dead dreams. I closed my eyes and let the memory wash over me. It was 20 years ago. Darius was 18. We were in my study. He had just been accepted into college, but his grades were borderline and his scholarship applications had been rejected. He had fallen to his knees right there on my Persian rug. "Dad," he had pleaded, his young eyes wet with tears, "please, I need your name. I need to be a Lewis. When people see Jackson on my application, they see a statistic. When they see Lewis, they see a future. They see you." I had been so proud that day. I thought he wanted my name because he wanted to be my son. I thought he wanted to carry the legacy of hard work and integrity I had built. I didn't realize then that he didn't want the name for the honor. He wanted it for the credit score. He wanted it as a key to unlock doors he was too lazy to kick down himself. I signed the adoption papers the next week. I gave him the name. I gave him the credibility. I made him a prince in a kingdom he didn't help build. And now, staring at the dirt covering the only person who ever truly loved us both, I realized that was the day I signed my own death warrant. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke my reverie. An engine sputtered and died. A car door slammed with the tinny sound of cheap metal. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. I had been expecting them. Booker. The voice was raspy, wet, with years of cheap gin and bad decisions. Ray Jackson. I slowly turned. They were walking toward me across the grass, disrespecting the dead with every heavy, angry step. Darius looked like a wreck. His suit was wrinkled, his tie loose, his eyes bloodshot and wide with panic. Beside him was Ray, wearing a leather jacket that was too tight and jeans that were too loose. He walked with a swagger that hid a stumble. "You think you can just cut us off?" Ray shouted, his voice echoing off the headstones. "You think you can take the food out of my boy's mouth?" Darius rushed forward, his hands shaking. "Dad, stop. We just need to talk. You have to unfreeze the accounts. The suppliers are calling. The bank is calling. I can't get into the building." I looked at Darius. I didn't see the CEO anymore. I saw a scared kid who got caught with his hand in the cookie jar only to realize the jar was filled with scorpions. "There is nothing to talk about, Darius," I said calmly. "The conversation ended when you put your hands on me." Ray lunged. It was a clumsy, violent movement. He pulled something from his pocket, maybe a knife, maybe just a fistful of rings. "I'm going to beat the old out of you," Ray roared, charging at me. I didn't flinch. I didn't move a muscle. I just watched him come. 2 steps before he reached me, a shadow moved from behind the large oak tree to my right, then another from the left. Marcus and Tyrell, my bodyguards. They weren't just security. They were former Marines who had done tours in places Ray couldn't find on a map. They were 6'4" mountains of muscle and discipline dressed in black coats that concealed their own weapons. Marcus stepped in front of me, a human wall. He didn't strike Ray. He simply extended one massive arm and caught Ray by the throat, stopping him mid-stride as easily as a man catches a tennis ball. Ray gagged his feet, leaving the ground for a second before Marcus slammed him down onto the grass. "Stay down," Marcus rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. Tyrell stepped up to Darius, crossing his arms. Darius froze, looking from his biological father gasping in the dirt to the wall of muscle blocking his path. "You brought goons to a graveyard," Darius squeaked. "I brought insurance," I corrected him, "because I know trash when I see it." I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't the red file. This was something new, something personal. I threw the envelope at Darius. It hit him in the chest and slid down to the grass. "Pick it up," I ordered. Darius hesitated, then bent down. His hands shook as he opened the clasp. He pulled out the documents. He read the title, and I saw the color drain from his face until he looked like the ghosts we were standing among. "Petition for annulment of adult adoption." He read, his voice barely a whisper. "And petition for legal name change revocation." "That is right," I said, stepping closer. I walked right up to Tyrell, who stepped aside to let me pass. I stood toe-to-toe with the man who used to be my son. "You told me last night that the chair belonged to your father," I said, pointing at Ray, who was still wheezing on the ground. "You said you were Darius and father. Well, I am granting your wish." "Dad, you can't," Darius stammered. "I am not your dad," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "And as of this morning, when my lawyers filed that motion, you are no longer a Lewis." I gestured to the city skyline visible in the distance. In this town, the name Lewis opens doors. It gets lines of credit. It gets permits approved by the city council before the ink is dry. It gets respect from the unions and the banks. It is a gold standard, Darius. And it is my intellectual property. I leaned in close. "You are Darius Jackson now, and do you know what the name Jackson gets you in Atlanta? It gets you a declined debit card. It gets you laughed out of loan offices. It gets you absolutely nothing." Darius looked at the papers, then back at me. The realization was dawning on him. He wasn't just losing the money. He was losing the identity that allowed him to pretend he was someone important. "Without my name, you are just a guy with a gambling debt and a bad reputation," I said. "You wanted to be your father's son. Go ahead, be a Jackson. See how far that name takes you in the boardroom." Ray scrambled to his feet, dusting off his jacket, staying well out of Marcus's reach. He looked at Darius, then at the papers. "What does that mean?" Ray asked, his eyes darting back and forth.
"What does he mean you ain't a Lewis?"
"It means Dad." Darius whispered, his voice cracking, "that he is stripping me of the name. He is taking the legacy." Ray's face twisted. "But the money?" "What about the money? You said you still had the trust fund. You said even if he fired you, the name guaranteed the trust payouts." Darius looked at Ray. For the first time, he saw the man for what he was. Ray wasn't angry that Darius had lost a father. He was angry that the ATM had been unplugged. "The trust is contingent on the heir bearing the Lewis surname," I said, answering for him. "It is in the bylaws. No Lewis, no payout." Ray looked at Darius with pure disgust. "You idiot," Ray spat. "You told me this was a sure thing. You told me the old man was senile and we would be swimming in cash by New Year's." I didn't say that, Darius protested, looking desperate. I thought he would just roll over." "You thought wrong," I said. Ray stepped toward Darius. "You better fix this boy. I owe people money, bad people. If I don't pay them because you lost your golden ticket, they are going to come for me and I am going to point them right at you." Darius backed away from his own father. "Dad, please. I am broke." He took the cards. He took the car. Ray sneered. "Then you are useless to me." Ray turned and walked back to the beat-up car. He didn't offer Darius a ride. He got in, slammed the door, and peeled out, leaving tire tracks on the cemetery lawn. Darius stood alone in the cold wind, holding the papers that stripped him of his identity. He looked at the retreating car, then at me. "He is my dad," Darius whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He just left me." I looked at him. I felt a twinge of pity, but it was distant, like looking at a stranger's misfortune. "He left you 30 years ago for the same reason, Darius," I said. "Because you were broke. I was the one who picked you up. I was the one who gave you a name, and you threw me on the floor for him." Darius dropped to his knees. It was the exact same posture as 30 years ago, but this time there was no innocence. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "I am sorry. I will fix it. Just give me the name back. I can't be a Jackson. I don't know how to be nobody." I signaled to Marcus and Tyrell. We began to walk back to my car. "You should have thought about that before you pushed me," I said over my shoulder. I stopped at the car door and looked back one last time. Darius was kneeling in the grass, weeping, clutching the legal documents like they were a lifeline that had just been cut. "You aren't nobody, Darius," I said. "You are exactly who you chose to be. You are your father's son." I got into the car. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud shutting out his crying. "Drive," I told the driver. As we pulled away, I didn't look back at the grave. I had made my peace with Viola. She would have understood. She loved the boy, but she hated the lie. And today, I had finally killed the lie. Darius Jackson was on his own, and the name Lewis was clean again. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. It was a sterile, windowless box where families went to die, torn apart by greed and the cold letter of the law. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands resting on the polished oak, feeling a calmness that surprised even me. Beside me, my attorney, Mr. Sterling, arranged his files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation. Across the aisle, my son Darius sat with a man who looked like he had purchased his suit at a discount outlet 5 minutes before the hearing. Darius looked terrible. The arrogance that usually fit him like a second skin was fraying at the edges. His eyes were bloodshot, darting around the room as if looking for an exit or perhaps a miracle. He had run out of liquid cash cut off from the company accounts and my personal funds. The lawyer he had scraped together, a nervous man named Mr. Finch, was sweating profusely despite the aggressive air conditioning. This was the best Darius could do. He was suing me, his own father, for immediate control of the company, claiming I was mentally incompetent and mismanaging the legacy his mother had left behind. The irony was bitter on my tongue. Darius, who had never worked a full day in the warehouse, who viewed the business as nothing more than a personal piggy bank, was now trying to paint me as the liability. Judge Reynolds entered the room. She was a formidable woman, African-American, with silver hair pulled back into a severe bun, and eyes that had seen every variation of human folly. She did not suffer fools, and she commanded the room with a silence that was heavier than any gavel bang. Mr. Finch stood up to make his opening statement. It was a rambling, disjointed speech about shareholders' rights and the necessity of fresh leadership. He painted Darius as a concerned son watching his father's mental faculties decline. He claimed I was erratic, vindictive, and spending company money on frivolous personal vendettas. Darius nodded along, trying to look the part of the aggrieved heir, but his leg bounced under the table, a telltale sign of his unraveling nerves. When it was our turn, Mr. Sterling did not raise his voice. He did not wave his arms. He simply stood and addressed the judge with a quiet respect. He stated that we were not there to debate my mental health, nor were we there to discuss the intricacies of corporate law. We were there to discuss the final wishes of Viola, my late wife, and the true heart of our family empire. Darius scoffed audibly. He thought this was a waste of time. He thought the will was standard, a simple transfer of assets that he was entitled to by blood. He had never bothered to read the fine print. He had never bothered to understand the woman who gave him life. Mr. Sterling pulled a thick document from his briefcase. It was the original copy of Viola's last will and testament. He cleared his throat and began to read. He skipped the preamble, the distribution of minor assets, and the sentimental bequests. He went straight to the end, to a section that Darius did not know existed. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "I would like to direct the court's attention to Clause 14. Darius frowned. I could see him whispering frantically to his cheap lawyer, asking what Clause 14 was. Mr. Finch was frantically flipping through his own copy of the papers, looking lost. Mr. Sterling continued reading. Clause 14 states that the inheritance of the company's shares and the family trust is conditional. It is not a birthright, but a trust placed in the character of the beneficiary. Viola wrote these words herself. If at any time my son Darius exhibits behavior that is fundamentally unfilial, or if he causes physical harm or distress to his father, Booker, his claim to the estate is immediately and irrevocably forfeited. The silence in the room deepened. Darius stopped bouncing his leg. He stared at Mr. Sterling, his mouth slightly open. In the event of such a forfeiture, Mr. Sterling read, on the entirety of his portion shall be liquidated and transferred to the Viola Fund, a scholarship trust dedicated to the education of underprivileged children in our community. Darius stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "That is ridiculous," he shouted, his voice cracking. "That is not legal. You cannot disinherit me based on some vague definition of unfilial behavior. I have never harmed my father. This is a fabrication." Judge Reynolds lowered her glasses and looked at Darius. "Sit down, Mr. Darius. You will have your turn to speak. But be warned that outbursts in my courtroom will not aid your case." Darius sank back into his chair, seething. His lawyer whispered something to him, probably telling him that they could argue the definition of harm. They would claim it was subjective. They would claim I was making it up to steal his share. I knew exactly what they were thinking. They thought it was my word against his. Mr. Sterling waited for the room to settle. He looked at Darius with a pity that must have burned. "We are not relying on subjective definitions, Your Honor. We are relying on hard evidence. We assert that Mr. Darius not only attempted to financially ruin his father, but committed a physical assault against him within the family home." "Lies," Darius hissed. "I never touched him." Mr. Sterling turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit A into evidence. It is a video recording taken from the security system in the family dining room." Darius froze. His face went from angry to ashen gray in a split second. He looked at me, and for the first time he saw the trap. He realized he had walked into a room with no doors. He did not know about the camera. I had installed it months ago, not because of him, but because I had suspected Ray, our gardener, of stealing silverware. It was a petty suspicion, a small paranoia of an old man trying to protect his home. I had felt guilty about it at the time. I never caught Ray stealing anything. Instead, the camera had sat there, a silent observer in the corner of the ceiling, recording the life of our house. It had recorded the moment Darius stormed into the dining room 3 weeks ago. Mr. Sterling set up a laptop and connected it to the large screen on the wall. He pressed play. The video was high definition. The audio was crisp. The courtroom watched as the digital version of Darius paced back and forth in front of the digital version of me. We heard his voice loud and aggressive, demanding that I sign over the deed to the warehouse. We heard him insult me, calling me a stubborn old fool who should just die and get out of the way. We heard the hatred in his voice, a sound that cut deeper than any knife. Then the moment arrived. On the screen, I refused to sign. I told him to leave. Darius's face twisted in a snarl. He lunged across the table. The camera captured the shove perfectly. It was violent and deliberate. I saw myself fall backward, the chair tipping over my head, striking the floor with a sickening thud. The courtroom gasped. I saw the judge flinch. On the screen, Darius did not help me up. He stood over me, shouting that I was pathetic before storming out of the room, leaving his own father lying on the floor. Mr. Sterling paused the video on the frame where Darius was standing over me, his face contorted with rage. The image remained frozen on the screen, a portrait of a son who had lost his soul. "Your Honor," Mr. Sterling said softly, "Viola knew her son. She loved him, but she saw the darkness in him that we tried to ignore. She wrote Clause 14 because she feared this day would come. She wanted to protect her husband when she could no longer be there to do it herself. This video serves as definitive proof that the conditions of Clause 14 have been met. Darius has caused physical harm to his father. He has acted with malice. Therefore, according to the will, he has forfeited his inheritance." Darius was shaking. He looked at his lawyer, begging him to do something, to say something. But Mr. Finch just closed his folder. There was no defense against this. There was no legal argument that could erase what everyone had just seen. Darius stood up again, but this time there was no aggression, only panic. "Mom was sick," he stammered. "She didn't know what she was writing. Dad manipulated her. He made her put that in there." Judge Reynolds stared at him. Her gaze was not angry. It was something far worse. It was filled with a profound disappointment, the kind that only a mother figure can project. She looked at him as if he were something small and broken that could not be fixed. "Mr. Darius," the judge said, her voice calm and terrifying, "I have reviewed the medical records of your late mother. She was of sound mind and body until the very end. Her will was notarized and witnessed by 3 independent parties. This clause is not a suggestion. It is a binding legal command. She looked up at the screen at the frozen image of Darius standing over my fallen body. You have shown this court exactly who you are. You have proven your mother's fears to be well-founded. It is rare that I see a case where the moral answer and the legal answer are so perfectly aligned. She picked up her pen and wrote on the docket. Her hand did not tremble. I am ruling in favor of the defendant Booker. The petition to remove him from the company is denied with prejudice. Furthermore, I am upholding the validity of Clause 14. Based on the evidence presented you, Darius have violated the terms of the trust. Your rights to the inheritance are hereby terminated. Darius made a sound like a wounded animal. No, you can't do this. I have nothing. I have debts. I need that money. The judge continued as if he hadn't spoken. The assets previously allocated to you will be transferred immediately to the Viola Fund. It seems fitting that the wealth your mother built will go to children who understand the value of gratitude and hard work, traits you sadly lack. She looked at him one last time. Her eyes were cold, stripping away his last layer of pretense. You may leave my courtroom, Mr. Darius, and I suggest you find honest work. You will need it. She banged the gavel. The sound rang out like a gunshot, signaling the end of his life as he knew it. Darius collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. He was crying now, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. He was crying for the cars he would never buy, the power he would never wield, the easy life that had just evaporated into the air. I stood up slowly. My hips still ached from the fall he had caused, a physical reminder of why we were here. I looked at my son, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, the man who had pushed me down. I felt a great hollowness in my chest, a space where hope used to live. Mr. Sterling touched my arm gently. It is done, Booker. It is over. I nodded. I did not look back at Darius as I walked out of the courtroom. I walked past him, past his cheap lawyer, past the screen that still displayed his shame. I walked out into the hallway where the air was cooler and the smell of stale coffee was gone. I had won. The company was safe. The legacy was safe. But as I walked toward the exit, I did not feel like a victor. I felt like a father who had just buried his son not in the earth, but in the grave of his own greed. Viola had protected me just as she promised she would. She had reached out from beyond the veil and played her final card. Clause 14 was not just a legal trap. It was a mother's final lesson. She had given him a choice, and he had chosen his fate. Now the money would go to children who had nothing, and Darius would have to learn for the first time in his life what it meant to survive on his own. I stepped out of the courthouse into the blinding afternoon sun. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the fresh air. It was time to go back to work. It was time to rebuild. And for the first time in a long time, I walked without looking over my shoulder because the wolf that had been chasing me was finally gone. The silence in my new modest apartment was heavy, broken only by the hum of the hard drive and the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. I sat in my armchair, a cup of tea growing cold beside me, my eyes fixed on the glow of the laptop screen. I was no longer living in the mansion that Viola and I had built, but through the digital eyes of the security system I had installed months ago, I was still the master of that house. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent observer of the kingdom I had been forced to abandon. On the screen, the high-definition feed showed the living room of the estate. It was a scene of absolute devastation. The pristine order that Viola had maintained for decades was gone, replaced by the filth of squatters who had no respect for the roof over their heads. Darius had been defeated in court, stripped of his inheritance, and was likely hiding in a bottle of cheap whiskey somewhere in the city. That left Tiffany and her father Ray trapped in a golden cage with no key and, more importantly, no money. Ray was pacing the room like a caged animal. The camera captured the tremors in his hands and the sweat glistening on his forehead. He was going through withdrawals. The cash flow had stopped the moment the judge banged her gavel. There was no more money for vodka. There was no more money for the lifestyle he felt he was owed. The monster that lived inside him was scratching at the door, demanding to be fed. I watched as he picked up a crystal vase from the mantelpiece. It was a piece Viola had brought back from a trip to Italy 20 years ago. Ray looked at it not with appreciation, but with a sneer of disgust. He hurled it against the wall. The sound was muted through my speakers, but I saw the explosion of glass shards raining down onto the Persian rug. He did not stop there. He overturned a side table. He kicked the cushions off the sofa. He was screaming on the walls, raging against a silence that refused to give him what he wanted. Tiffany entered the frame. She looked nothing like the arrogant woman who had sneered at me across the dinner table weeks ago. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy knot. She wore a silk robe that was stained and wrinkled. She looked tired, worn down by the reality of living with a man she had championed as the ideal father figure. She said something to him. I adjusted the volume, straining to hear through the microphone embedded in the smoke detector. "There is no money, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "Darius is gone. The accounts are frozen. We have nothing." Ray spun around to face her. His eyes were wild, bloodshot orbs of fury. He did not see his daughter. He saw an obstacle. He saw a failure. He approached her, his gait unsteady but menacing. "You are holding out on me," he slurred. "I know you have cash stashed away." "You always have money for your creams and your clothes. Give it to me. I need a drink. I don't have it," Tiffany cried out, stepping back until she hit the wall. "We spent it all on the lawyers. We spent it on the food. There is nothing left." I watched his hand rise. It was a slow, deliberate movement, heavy with the threat of violence. I sat forward in my chair, my muscles tensing. Part of me wanted to reach through the screen to stop what was coming. But another part of me, a colder, harder part that had been forged in the fires of their betrayal, stayed still. I needed to see this. I needed her to see this. Ray struck her. It was a brutal, backhanded slap that sent her sprawling onto the floor. She lay there for a moment, stunned, her hand cupping her cheek. She looked up at him, not with anger, but with a shattering disbelief. This was the man she had brought into my home to replace me. This was the man she had called a hero, a provider, a real man compared to my perceived weakness. Now she was tasting the reality of his strength. Ray did not offer to help her up. He began tearing through the drawers of the sideboard, looking for loose change, looking for anything he could sell. Tiffany scrambled to her feet. She was panicking now. She ran to the landline phone that sat on the hallway table. She picked up the receiver, her fingers frantically punching in the numbers. I knew who she was calling. She was calling 911. She was calling for salvation. I watched her face crumble. She tapped the hook switch once, twice, 3 times. She stared at the receiver in horror. She had forgotten. In the chaos of the last few weeks, amidst the lawsuits and the fighting, no one had paid the phone bill. I had canceled the service the day after I moved out. The line was dead. The lifeline she reached for was nothing but plastic and silence. She dropped the phone. She looked back at the living room where Ray was now smashing a dining chair against the floor, breaking the legs off to find some release for his rage. He was destroying the legacy of a woman he never knew, a woman who would have looked at him with nothing but pity. Tiffany realized she was alone. The gates were locked. The car was likely out of gas or repossessed. She was trapped in a mansion with a monster of her own making. I watched as she made her decision. She did not try to fight him. She turned and ran for the front door. She fumbled with the heavy brass lock, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the latch. Finally, the door swung open, and she burst out into the late afternoon light. I switched the camera feed to the exterior view. I saw her running across the manicured lawn, her bare feet slipping on the grass. She was heading for the neighbors, the Johnsons. They were good people, quiet people who had watched the decline of my household with a polite distance. Now they were about to become part of the tragedy. I saw Mrs. Johnson come out onto her porch, alerted by the screaming. I saw Tiffany collapse into her arms, sobbing, pointing back at my house. I sat back in my chair. My heart was beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. I had the phone in my hand. I could have called the police 5 minutes ago. I could have sent a patrol car the moment Ray threw the vase. But I had waited. I had let the scene play out. It was not cruelty. It was education. Tiffany needed to understand that the protection she had enjoyed for years was not a natural right. It was a gift I had provided. She needed to understand that the real father she idolized was a man who would hit her for a bottle of vodka. She needed to feel the cold wind of the world without my shelter. She needed to be broken so that she could eventually be fixed, if fixing was even possible. I watched the screen for a few more minutes. I saw the police lights flashing in the distance, silent on my monitor but loud in the real world. The Johnsons had made the call. Ray would be arrested. The destruction would end. Then my own phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet apartment. I looked at the caller ID. It was a number I did not recognize, likely the Johnsons' home phone. I let it ring twice. I took a sip of my cold tea. Then I answered. "Hello," I said, my voice calm, steady, the voice of a man who was in control of his own destiny. "Booker." The voice on the other end was unrecognizable. It was high-pitched, hysterical, broken by gasping sobs. It was Tiffany. "Booker, please," she cried. "You have to come. You have to help me. He went crazy. He hit me. He destroyed everything. Please, Booker, I am so sorry. I didn't know he was like this." I listened to her beg. I listened to the woman who had mocked my grief, who had spent my money, who had tried to steal my company. I heard the fear in her voice, the primal terror of a child who realizes the dark is real. "Tiffany," I said, and my voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "You told me he was the father you always wanted. You told me he was a strong man. You invited him in. You gave him the wine. You gave him the power. Booker." "Please," she wailed. "I am begging you. Save me." I looked at the screen. I saw the police officers dragging Ray out of the front door in handcuffs. He was kicking and spitting, a pathetic figure stripped of his bluster. "You are safe now, Tiffany," I said. "The police are there. You don't need me. You made your choice. You chose your family. Now you have to live with them." "But I have nowhere to go," she whispered. "I have no money. I have no home." "That," I said softly, "is the cost of the lesson." I hung up the phone. The silence returned to the apartment, but it was no longer heavy. It was clean. It was the silence of a slate being wiped clean. I closed the laptop. I did not need to watch anymore. The show was over. The actors had played their parts and the curtain had fallen. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights, feeling a strange, sad sense of freedom. The house was destroyed, yes. The family was broken, yes. But the truth, the ugly, violent, necessary truth, had finally been revealed. And that was worth more than any vase or chair. The flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers painted the facade of my home in a chaotic, strobing rhythm. It was a house that Viola and I had built with quiet dignity, a sanctuary of peace that had stood for decades as a testament to our hard work. Now it looked like a crime scene, a spectacle for the neighbors to whisper about behind their curtains. I stepped out of my car, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, and felt a strange, cold detachment. I was not here as a father rushing to save his son. I was here as the property owner responding to a disturbance. I was here as the final instrument of karma. The front door was wide open, hanging off one hinge as if it had been kicked in. From inside, the sounds of screaming tore through the night air. It was a raw, primal sound, the sound of an animal trapped in a corner. I walked past the officers who were securing the perimeter, my face an unreadable mask. They let me pass because I was the one who had called them and because I held the deed to the property in my briefcase. I entered the hallway. The air smelled of stale alcohol, sweat, and fear. The destruction was absolute. Furniture was overturned, paintings were slashed, and the expensive vase collection Viola had loved so much was nothing but glittering dust on the hardwood floor. In the living room, the tableau of their failure was complete. Ray stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his eyes wild and bloodshot. He was holding a carving knife, a long, serrated blade that I used to use for Sunday roasts. He was waving it erratically, slicing the air between himself and the cowering figures on the floor. Darius and Tiffany were huddled together near the fireplace. They looked pathetic. Darius, the man who had worn custom suits and sneered at my management style, was now trembling in a stained t-shirt, his hands raised in a gesture of absolute surrender. Tiffany was weeping, her makeup smeared across her face, clutching Darius's arm as if he could protect her. But Darius could not even protect himself. Ray was shouting incoherent slurs, demanding money that did not exist, demanding respect he had never earned. He lunged forward, the knife flashing in the dim light. Darius scrambled backward, knocking over a lamp. Then Darius saw me. He looked up, and for a split second the years of betrayal, the lawsuits, and the insults vanished from his eyes. He saw the man who had taught him to ride a bike. He saw the man who had paid for his college tuition. He saw the safety net that had always caught him. "Dad," he screamed, his voice cracking with terror. "Dad, help me! Save me! He is going to kill us!" He reached out a hand toward me, a desperate plea for salvation. He expected me to step in. He expected me to be the shield I had always been. He thought that despite everything he had done, the bond of blood would override the reality of his actions. I stopped. I stood there in the entrance of the living room looking down at him. I looked at the fear in his eyes, and I felt nothing. The well of my patience had not just run dry, it had been filled with concrete. I looked at Ray, the man Darius and Tiffany had embraced, the man they had brought into my home to replace me, the man they had called a hero, a real man, a breath of fresh air compared to my boring stability. I looked back at Darius. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the calm precision of a judge delivering a death sentence. "I am not your father," I said. Darius froze. His hand dropped. "Your father is the one holding the knife," I continued. "You chose him. You chose his way. You chose his chaos. Now, you are with your family." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Darius stared at me, his mouth open, unable to comprehend that the door to my protection was not just closed, it was bricked over. I was not disowning him in a fit of rage, I was simply stating a fact. He had traded his birthright for a mirage, and now the mirage was trying to gut him. The police officers swarmed the room. They moved with professional efficiency. 2 of them flanked Ray, tasers drawn. "Drop the weapon," they shouted. Ray turned toward them, confused, his alcoholic brain unable to process the shift in power. He raised the knife, perhaps to surrender, perhaps to attack. It did not matter. The officers did not take chances. There was a sharp crack of electricity. Ray convulsed and collapsed to the floor, the knife clattering away across the wood. They were on him in seconds, handcuffing him, dragging him up by his arms. He was screaming curses, spitting at the officers, a broken, violent man who had finally run out of victims. Darius and Tiffany sobbed with relief. They hugged each other, thinking the nightmare was over. They thought that with Ray gone, peace would return. They thought they could just clean up the mess and go back to sleep in my guest bedrooms. They stood up, dusting themselves off. Darius looked at me again, wary now, but still hopeful. He took a step toward me. "Booker," he said, using my name now, testing the waters. "Thank God you came." He went crazy. We didn't know what to do. I did not answer him. I turned to the lead officer, a sergeant with a gray mustache who looked tired of domestic disputes. "Officer," I said, "I am the legal owner of this property. Here is the deed and the court order granting me full possession." I handed him the folder I had brought. He opened it, scanned the documents with a flashlight, and nodded. "These people," I said, pointing at Darius and Tiffany, "are trespassing. They have no lease. They have no legal right to be here. I want them removed from the premises immediately." Darius looked as if I had slapped him. "What?" he stammered. "Dad, no. We live here. This is our home." "It is not your home," I said. "It is my house, and you are strangers who broke in. Officer, please." Tiffany cried, her voice shrill. "We have nowhere to go. Our things are here. You can't just kick us out in the middle of the night." The sergeant looked at them. He saw the destruction in the room. He saw the legal documents in his hand. He saw a homeowner who was calm and collected and 2 squatters who had brought violence into a peaceful neighborhood. "Ma'am," the officer said, "you need to gather your essential personal items. You have 5 minutes to vacate the property or you will be arrested for trespassing." 5 minutes, Darius whispered. 5 minutes, I repeated. They scrambled. It was a pathetic sight. They grabbed trash bags from the kitchen and ran to the bedrooms. They threw clothes in haphazardly. They didn't pack photos. They didn't pack memories. They grabbed jewelry, shoes, expensive coats. Even in their downfall, their priorities were material. They were looting the wreckage of their own lives. I stood by the door and watched them. I did not help. I did not offer a box. I did not offer a ride. I simply watched the clock. When the 5 minutes were up, the officers escorted them out. They stood on the sidewalk, shivering in the cool night air. They had 4 black trash bags between them. They had no car, as the leasing company had repossessed it yesterday. They had no money, as the accounts were frozen. They had no friends, as their arrogance had driven everyone away. I walked out onto the porch. The locksmith I had called was already there, waiting by his van. He was a quiet man who knew better than to ask questions. "Change them all," I told him. "Front door, back door, side gate. I want deadbolts. I want security plates." Darius stood on the curb watching the locksmith work. He looked at the house, the golden windows glowing in the night, the warmth he was now exiled from. He looked at me standing on the steps, the king of an empty castle. "Where are we supposed to go?" he shouted from the street. I looked at him one last time. I remembered the day he was born. I remembered the pride I felt. Then I remembered the video of him pushing me down. I remembered him calling me weak. I remembered him wishing I was dead so he could spend my money. "That is not my problem," I said. "You wanted to be your own man, Darius. You wanted to be the boss. You wanted to run the world." I gestured to the empty street, the dark horizon, the endless cold night. "Go run it." I turned my back on them. I walked inside and closed the door. The sound of the heavy oak slamming shut was final. I heard the locksmith's drill bite into the wood, a mechanical sound of separation. I engaged the lock. Inside the house was quiet. It was ruined, yes. It was dirty, but it was mine. The air felt lighter. The heaviness of their presence was gone. I walked to the kitchen, stepped over the broken glass, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. My heart was calm. I had lost a son, but I had regained my life. And as I took a drink, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid of what tomorrow would bring, because whatever it would be mine to decide. The morning sun did not bring warmth to Atlanta. It brought a harsh, revealing light that stripped away the shadows where rats like to hide. I sat in my office, the one I had rented in a quiet building downtown far from the wreckage of my old estate. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room, a scent of order and discipline. On the desk before me lay the morning edition of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was heavy, substantial, the kind of paper that captains of industry read with their breakfast. I ran my hand over the front page, feeling the texture of the newsprint. I did not need to turn many pages to find what I was looking for. It was there, in the business section, a quarter-page notice framed in a stark black border. It was an announcement, a declaration, and a guillotine blade all in one. Darius had not learned. That was the tragedy of my son. He believed that resilience was simply the ability to tell a new lie before the old one had fully unraveled. After being evicted from my home, after being humiliated in court, he had tried to pivot. He had scraped together the last of his charisma, put on his one remaining suit, and tried to launch a new venture. He called it Darius and Father Construction. The audacity was breathtaking. He was trading on a relationship he had murdered, using the ghost of a bond to con the city that knew my name. I knew his schedule. I knew his moves before he made them, because desperation makes a man predictable. He had meetings lined up all week with my old suppliers, with subcontractors I had fed for 30 years, with investors who trusted the Lewis brand. He was walking into their offices, smiling that winning smile and telling them that I was retiring, that I was sick, that I had given him my blessing to carry the torch. He was asking for credit. He was asking for trust based on a bloodline he had disgraced. I imagined him right now. He would be sitting in the plush office of Mr. Henderson, the city's largest lumber supplier. Henderson was a good man, an old-school man who believed a handshake was a contract. Darius would be leaning forward, his elbows on the mahogany desk, spinning a tale of expansion and modernization. He would be saying that Booker Lewis was tired, that the old man was stepping back, and that the new company was the future. He would be asking for $50,000 in materials on net 60 terms. He would be charming. He would be convincing. But then Henderson's secretary would walk in. She would not be carrying coffee. She would be carrying the paper. I took a sip of my coffee and read the text of my notice one more time. It was brief. It was brutal. It was necessary. Notice to the public and trade partners. I, Booker Lewis, sole owner of Lewis Construction, hereby state that I have no business, professional, or personal association with Darius Jackson. Any entity operating under the name Darius and Father, or implying a connection to my legacy, is doing so without my consent or endorsement. Darius Jackson does not speak for me. He does not represent me. Any use of the Lewis reputation to secure credit or contracts is a fraudulent act. Proceed at your own risk. It was not a warning. It was an excommunication. I could almost hear the silence falling over the city. In boardrooms and supply yards, men were reading those words. They were looking at the invoices Darius had submitted. They were looking at the contracts he was trying to get them to sign. The construction world in Atlanta is a small, tight-knit ecosystem. Reputation is currency. If your name is mud, you do not eat. The phone on my desk remained silent. That was good. It meant the message had been received. But across town, Darius's phone would be screaming. I closed my eyes and let the scene play out in my mind. Henderson reading the notice. The color draining from his face. The realization that he had almost been played for a fool. He would look up at Darius. The warmth would vanish from his eyes, replaced by the cold steel of a businessman protecting his bottom line. I pictured Darius's confusion. He wouldn't know yet. He would think the meeting was going well. He would reach for the contract, and then Henderson would slide the newspaper across the desk. "Get out," Henderson would say. Darius would stammer. He would try to laugh it off. He would say it was a misunderstanding, a family spat, a legal tactic. "Get out," Henderson would repeat, standing up, "and don't come back. If you set foot on my yard again, I will have you arrested for fraud." Darius would be ejected onto the street. He would stand there, the humidity of the Georgia morning clinging to him like a second skin, realizing that the ground had vanished beneath his feet. But it wouldn't stop there. The dominoes were falling. His phone would ring. It would be the concrete supplier. Canceled. It would be the heavy equipment rental agency. Canceled. It would be the small bank where he had tried to open a line of credit. Denied. I had contacted the Association of General Contractors the day before. I had sent them the court transcripts. I had sent them the police report from the night Ray went crazy. By noon today, Darius Jackson would be on the blacklist. No reputable subcontractor would work for him. No supplier would give him a single nail without cash up front. And Darius had no cash. The tragedy was that he had talent. He could sell ice to a polar bear. If he had used that energy to build his own path, to start small and work his way up, I would have respected him. I would have helped him. But he wanted the elevator, not the stairs. He wanted the harvest without the planting. Now he was standing in a field of salt. The day dragged on. I worked on my own projects, small consulting jobs that kept my mind sharp. I did not check on him. I did not look at the cameras. I let the machinery of the real world grind him down. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised purple, threatening a storm. I packed my briefcase and walked out into the city. I found myself driving almost against my will toward the part of town where the neon lights buzzed with the sound of desperate mosquitoes. It was the district of pawn shops and pay-by-the-hour motels. It was where people went when they had run out of options. I parked across the street from a pawn shop called Gold and Glory. It was a miserable place with bars on the windows and a security guard who looked like he had seen too much. I didn't have to wait long. Darius walked down the street. He was no longer wearing his suit jacket. His tie was gone. His shirt was stained with sweat. He walked with a slump, the swagger completely beaten out of him. He looked at the shop window, hesitating. He looked at the gold chains and the musical instruments, the debris of 1,000 broken dreams. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a watch. It was the Rolex I had given him when he graduated college. It was a beautiful timepiece, a symbol of time, of patience, of the long game. He stared at it for a long moment. I wondered if he was remembering the day I gave it to him, the pride in my eyes, the hope for his future. Then he pulled a ring from his finger, his wedding band, the symbol of his commitment to Tiffany, the woman who had helped him destroy our family, the woman who was likely screaming at him right now in some alleyway because they had no place to sleep. He walked into the shop. Through the glass, I watched him approach the counter. He placed the watch and the ring on the velvet tray. The broker behind the glass, a man with no neck and eyes like flint, picked up the watch. He examined it with a loupe. He weighed the ring. He typed something into a calculator. I saw Darius arguing. He was pleading. He was gesturing with his hands, trying to sell the value, trying to explain that these were heirlooms, that they were worth more than gold weight. The broker didn't care. The broker shook his head. He tapped the calculator again. Take it or leave it. Darius slumped. He nodded. He signed a piece of paper. The broker counted out a small stack of bills. It wasn't much. Enough for a week of bad food and a roof that leaked. Enough to survive, but not enough to live. Darius took the money. He shoved it into his pocket without counting it. He turned and walked out of the shop. When he stepped back onto the sidewalk, he looked up. For a second, his eyes met mine across the street. I was sitting in my car, the window rolled up safe in my own world. I don't know if he saw me. The sun was setting, reflecting off my windshield. He looked right at me, but his eyes were empty. They were the eyes of a man who had fallen off the edge of the world and was still falling. He turned away and started walking toward the Motel 6 down the block, the one with the flickering sign where the M was burnt out. I watched him go. I watched my son, the boy who used to run into my arms when he scraped his knee, walk into the darkness of a cheap motel lobby to pay for a night of oblivion. I put the car in gear. There was nothing left to do here. The lesson had been taught. The company was safe. My name was clean. But as I drove away, leaving him behind, the victory tasted like ash in my mouth. I had won the war, but the battlefield was a graveyard of memories. I drove home to my quiet apartment, to the silence that I had fought so hard to protect, and for the first time I felt the true weight of being the last man standing. It was a heavy burden, but it was mine to carry. And I would carry it with my head held high because the alternative was to become like him, and that was a fate I would not accept. The rain beat against the glass of my office window, a steady rhythmic drumming that usually brought me peace. It was the sound of the world washing itself clean. But today the atmosphere inside my office was heavy with the damp, cloying scent of desperation. Sitting across from me was Tiffany. She looked nothing like the queen of the manor she had pretended to be just a few months ago. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a polyester suit that didn't fit quite right. Her hair, usually a helmet of hairspray and expensive extensions, was pulled back in a severe fraying bun. But it was her eyes that told the real story. They were darting around the room, assessing the furniture, calculating the value of the art on the walls, hungry for a crumb of the lifestyle she had lost. She had come to me with a proposition. That was what she called it. I called it the final act of a tragedy. She had filed for divorce from Darius that morning. The ink was barely dry on the papers, and yet here she was, sitting in the office of the man she had conspired against, ready to sell the man she had married. Hunger does strange things to people. It strips away the veneer of civilization. It turns wolves into dogs that will eat their own kind. Tiffany was hungry. She was tired of the motel room. She was tired of the pawn shop meals. She was tired of Darius, a man who was now nothing more than a dead weight, dragging her down into the abyss of poverty. "Booker," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I know we have had our differences. I know things got ugly. But you have to understand I was manipulated. Darius, he has a way of twisting reality. He made me believe things that weren't true." I sat back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch, forcing her to fill it with more lies. "I am leaving him," she continued, leaning forward. "I can't live like this anymore. I deserve better. I have plans, Booker. Big plans. I want to open a boutique, a high-end fashion store. I have the vision. I just need the capital, a seed investment." She smiled, then a flash of teeth that was meant to be charming but looked predatory. "And why," I asked, my voice flat and even, "would I give you a single dime?" "Because," she said, reaching into her oversized handbag, "I have something you want, something you need." She pulled out a manila envelope. It was thick, creased at the corners. She placed it on the mahogany desk between us and covered it with her hand, her long, fake nails tapping a nervous rhythm on the paper. "Darius was sloppy," she said. "He thought he was smarter than everyone else. But I saw things. I kept things. Inside this envelope are the original contracts from 3 years ago, the ones for the government housing project." I looked at the envelope. I did not need to open it to know what was inside. "He forged your signature, Booker," she said, the words rushing out now. "He signed off on materials that were never ordered. He siphoned the difference into his personal account. I have the bank transfer records. I have the practice sheets where he traced your handwriting. It is all here. It is proof of fraud. It is proof of theft. It is the nail in his coffin." She sat back, looking triumphant. She thought she had played an ace. She thought she held the leverage. "I am willing to give this to you," she said. "I am willing to testify. I will tell the police everything. All I ask for is $50,000. It is a small price to pay for justice, isn't it? Think of it as a consulting fee, or startup assistance." She paused, waiting for me to reach for my checkbook. She expected anger. She expected shock. She expected gratitude. Instead, I laughed. It was a low, dry sound that seemed to startle her. It was not a laugh of humor. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Tiffany frowned. "Why are you laughing?" "This sends him to prison. This clears your name completely." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. I looked her deep in the eyes, stripping away the layers of her delusion. "I know," I said. Her frown deepened. "You know what I know? He forged the signatures," I said. "I knew 3 years ago. I saw the discrepancies in the ledger. I saw the inventory mismatches. I knew my son was stealing from me." "Then why didn't you stop him?" she demanded. "Why didn't you turn him in?" "Because he was my son," I said softly. "And I was foolish enough to hope he would correct his path. I covered the losses from my own savings. I balanced the books so the employees wouldn't lose their jobs. I waited for him to come to me. I waited for a confession that never came." I looked at the envelope under her hand. But I never had the physical proof of the forgery itself, I continued. He destroyed the originals, or so I thought. I didn't know he had kept them, and I certainly didn't know his wife was keeping them as an insurance policy against her own husband. Tiffany smiled again, her confidence returning. See, you need this. $50,000 Booker. Cash or wire transfer. And it is yours. I shook my head slowly. You misunderstand the situation, Tiffany. I was not laughing because I was surprised. I was laughing because I have been waiting for you. Waiting for me, she whispered, a flicker of fear igniting in her eyes. I knew that when the money ran out, the rats would start eating each other, I said. I knew you would not stick by him. You loved the lifestyle, not the man. I knew that eventually you would come here to sell him out. I just didn't know what the price tag would be. Now I know. $50,000. That is the price of your loyalty. I reached out and pressed a small button on the base of my desk phone. It beeped once. Tiffany, I said, did you know that in the state of Georgia, extortion is a felony? Her face went pale. The makeup stood out in stark relief against her skin. What I am not extorting you. I am selling you information. You are demanding money in exchange for evidence of a crime, I said. You are withholding evidence to secure a financial benefit. That is blackmail. That is extortion. And you just laid out your terms very clearly. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and placed it on the desk. The screen was glowing red. The voice recording app had been running since she walked through the door. I recorded it all I said. The demand, the amount, the admission that you have been holding on to evidence of a felony for years. Tiffany snatched her hand back from the envelope as if it were burning hot. She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. You can't do this, she stammered. I was trying to help you. No, I said, standing up to meet her gaze. You were trying to profit from my son's destruction. You were trying to secure your own future by burning his. The door to my office opened. Tiffany spun around. 2 uniformed police officers stood in the doorway. Behind them was my attorney, Mr. Sterling, looking as grim as a reaper. I called them before you arrived, I told her. I told them I was expecting a visit from a woman attempting to solicit funds through illegal means. Tiffany looked at the officers, then back at me. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were the tears of a trapped animal, not of a repentant soul. Booker, please, she cried. I am family. I was your daughter-in-law. You were a parasite, I corrected her, and now you are a criminal. Officers, I said, nodding to the men in blue. This woman is currently in possession of stolen documents belonging to Lewis Construction. She has just attempted to extort $50,000 from me in exchange for their return. The recording is on this phone. The documents are on the desk. One of the officers stepped forward. Tiffany Jackson, he said, his voice void of emotion. You are under arrest for extortion and obstruction of justice. Place your hands behind your back. No, she screamed. She lunged for the envelope, trying to grab it, trying to tear it, trying to destroy the leverage that had turned into a shackle. The officer was faster. He grabbed her wrist, spun her around, and clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound was sharp and final. She began to wail. It was a high, thin sound that grated on the nerves. She was shouting that it was all Darius's fault, that he made her do it, that she was a victim. She was bargaining with God, with the police, with me. But the market for her lies had closed. Take her away, I said, turning my back to look out the window at the gray, weeping sky. I heard them drag her out. I heard her heels scuffing against the carpet. I heard the door close, cutting off her screams. I turned back to the desk. The envelope was still there. I picked it up. Inside were the jagged, ugly signatures that my son had drawn, the evidence of his betrayal. I finally had the proof to close the book on Darius's fraud, to ensure he could never hurt the company again. But there was no joy in it. Darius was now truly alone. He was sitting in a motel room that smelled of mildew, waiting for a wife who was never coming back. He had lost his money. He had lost his reputation. And now he had lost the one person who had been his partner in crime. He had been stripped bare by the consequences of his own life. I sat down in my chair and listened to the rain. It fell harder now, hammering against the glass. It was a cold, lonely sound. I thought about the boy I had raised and the man he had become. I thought about the woman he had married and the cell she would sleep in tonight. Justice is a heavy coat to wear. It keeps you warm, but it weighs you down. I placed the envelope in my drawer and locked it. The day was over. The war was over. The silence in the office was absolute, and in that silence, I grieved for the living, for they were far more lost than the dead. The morning mist clung to the grass of the Rolling Hills Cemetery, creating a veil of silence over the rows of granite headstones. It was November 14th. On this day, Viola would have turned 65. Booker stood before the polished gray stone that bore her name, his hands clasped behind his back. He was dressed in his Sunday best, a charcoal suit that she had always admired, and in his hand he held a bouquet of white lilies. They were her favorites. He placed them gently against the cold marker, his movements slow and deliberate. For a long time, Booker simply stood there. He did not speak aloud. He spoke to her in the quiet chambers of his mind, telling her about the changing seasons, about the empty house that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume, and about the heavy burden he had finally laid down. He told her that he had kept his promise. It had been the hardest thing he had ever done, but he had done it. He had protected their legacy, even if it meant destroying the facade their son had built. The wind picked up rustling the dry autumn leaves that scattered across the path. Through the sound of the wind, Booker heard the crunch of erratic footsteps approaching from the main gate. He did not turn around immediately. He knew who it was. He had expected this. Darius stumbled up the slight incline toward the family plot. He looked nothing like the arrogant executive who had sneered at Booker across a boardroom table only weeks ago. The transformation was absolute and terrifying. His expensive suit was stained and wrinkled, the collar of his shirt torn open. He had not shaved in days, and his eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the dark circles of sleepless nights and chemical exhaustion. He swayed as he walked, a bottle of cheap liquor dangling loosely from his left hand. He looked exactly like Ray had looked in his final days of ruin. Darius stopped a few feet away from the grave. He stared at the headstone, his face crumpling into a mask of drunken misery. Then his gaze shifted to Booker. There was no respect in his eyes, only a deep burning hatred mixed with the pathetic confusion of a child who has been disciplined for the first time. "You are happy now, aren't you?" Darius slurred, his voice thick with intoxication. He gestured wildly with the bottle, splashing amber liquid onto the grass. "You come here to celebrate. You come here to tell her how you destroyed her son. Look at me. Look at what you did." Booker remained impassive. He looked at his son, really looked at him, and felt a pang of ancient sorrow. He saw the little boy who used to run into his arms when it thundered. He saw the teenager who had drifted away. And he saw the man who had let greed rot his soul from the inside out. "I did not do this to you, Darius." Booker said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the blustery wind. "You did this to yourself. I only removed the cushion that stopped you from feeling the fall." Darius let out a ragged, bitter laugh. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, heedless of the mud staining his trousers. He crawled forward until he could touch the cold stone of his mother's grave. He rested his forehead against it, his shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded more like angry barks. "Mom," he wailed, speaking to the stone. "Do you see him? Do you see how cruel he is? He took everything. He took my house. He took my company. He ruined my reputation. He left me with nothing. He hates me, Mom. He always hated me." Booker watched the performance with a heavy heart. Even now, at rock bottom, Darius could not accept responsibility. He was still the victim in his own story. He was still trying to manipulate the narrative, even to the dead. "You are wrong," Booker said softly. "I never hated you. I loved you enough to stop you before you destroyed everything your mother and I built. I loved you enough to teach you the lesson you refused to learn on your own." "Liar," Darius screamed, turning his head to glare at his father. "You are a monster. Mom would never have allowed this. She would have protected me. She would have hated you for what you have done. If she were here, she would spit in your face." This was the moment Booker had been waiting for. This was the final piece of the puzzle, the last seal on the tragedy. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. His fingers brushed against the thick, cream-colored paper of an envelope that had been sealed for 5 years. He pulled it out. The paper was slightly yellowed with age, but the handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was Viola's elegant, flowing script. It simply read, "To Darius." Booker took a step forward. He did not hand the letter to Darius. He tossed it lightly, and it landed on the grass right beside Darius's knee. "She knew," Booker said. His voice was low, filled with the weight of the secret he had carried. "She knew what you were becoming, Darius." She saw the greed in your eyes long before I wanted to admit it was there. She wrote this 3 days before she passed. She made me promise to keep it. She made me promise only to give it to you if the day came when you had lost your way completely. Darius stared at the envelope. The sight of his mother's handwriting seemed to sober him instantly. The rage drained out of his face, replaced by a fearful hesitation. He reached out with a trembling hand and picked it up. He traced his name on the paper. For a moment, the silence of the cemetery was absolute, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. Darius tore the envelope open. His fingers were clumsy, shaking so badly he almost ripped the letter inside. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. He began to read. Booker knew every word by heart, though he had never read it since the day Viola sealed it. She had read it to him on her deathbed, her voice weak but her mind sharp as a diamond. The letter began with a term of endearment. "My dearest Darius," it said, "if you are reading this letter, my heart breaks for you because it means you have fallen. It means you have done something terrible to your father." Darius's eyes widened as he scanned the lines. His lips moved silently, forming the words his mother had left for him from beyond the grave. "I have watched you change, my son," the letter continued. "I have watched the hunger for money replace the love in your heart. I have seen you look at our family business not as a legacy to protect, but as a resource to devour. I have spent many nights crying, praying that I was wrong, but a mother always knows." Darius let out a choked sound, a gasp that got stuck in his throat. "I made your father promise me something," the letter read. "I made him promise that if you ever tried to destroy what we built, if you ever tried to harm him or betray the values we taught you, he would stop you. I told him to be ruthless. I told him to strip you of every unearned privilege if that is what it took to save your soul. Do not blame him for his hardness. His hardness is my love. It is the only way to make you see that character matters more than coin." Darius was crying now, but these were not the angry tears of a petulant child. These were tears of shock. The foundation of his victimhood was crumbling. He had convinced himself that Booker was the villain and that his mother was the saint who would have sided with him. Now her own words were condemning him. The letter concluded with a final devastating blow. "Do not hate your father for doing what I asked him to do. If you find yourself with nothing, do not look at him with anger. Look in the mirror, blame your greed, blame your arrogance. And then when you have nothing left but the truth, start over. Build something real. That is the only way you will ever make me proud again. I love you always, Mom." The paper slipped from Darius's fingers and fluttered back to the grass. He did not try to pick it up. He slumped forward, his hands covering his face, his body convulsing with deep-racking sobs. The reality of his life crashed down upon him. He had not just lost a business war. He had not just lost his fortune. He had betrayed the one person he claimed to love most. He had broken his mother's heart while she was still alive, and he had forced his father to become the instrument of her justice. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the sound of a man's spirit breaking. Booker watched him for a long time. He felt no triumph. There is no victory in watching your child suffer, even if that suffering is necessary. He felt only a profound exhaustion. The duty was done. The lesson had been delivered. Booker stepped closer and placed a hand on the cold stone of the grave as if reassuring Viola that it was over. Then he looked down at his son one last time. "You have a choice now," Darius, Booker said quietly. "You can stay here in the dirt blaming the world and die a drunk and a failure like Ray. Or you can stand up. You can walk out of here with nothing in your pockets but the truth. You can get a job. You can work with your hands. You can earn $1 that actually belongs to you." Darius did not answer. He just kept weeping, his forehead pressed into the earth of his mother's grave. Booker adjusted his coat against the chill. He did not offer his hand to help Darius up. That part of his job was over. Darius had to stand up on his own or not at all. "Happy birthday," Viola, Booker whispered to the stone. He turned and walked away, his footsteps steady on the gravel path. He did not look back. He left his son alone with the ghosts of his choices and the final enduring gift of a mother who loved him enough to let him lose everything so that he might one day find himself. The phone rang in the dead of night, piercing the silence of the empty house like a scream. Booker sat in his armchair watching the embers of the fireplace fade into gray ash. He did not reach for the receiver immediately. He knew who was calling. He knew that the silence of the last few weeks had been the calm before the final storm. When he finally lifted the phone to his ear, he did not say a word. He just listened. "Dad, they are going to kill me." The voice on the other end was broken, terrified, and unrecognizable. It was Darius, but stripped of all his arrogance and polish. He sounded like a frightened child lost in the dark. "Please, Dad, I beg you. I borrowed money. I borrowed so much money to keep the house, to keep the car, to make people think I was still a king. Now they want it back. They are not businessmen, Dad. They are monsters." Booker asked for the address calmly. He did not ask how much. He did not ask why. He simply wrote down the location of an old warehouse district on the edge of the city, a place where streetlights flickered and died and where the law looked the other way. Darius sobbed into the phone, telling him to bring cash, telling him to sell the house, telling him to do anything. Booker hung up the phone. He stood up and adjusted his coat. He did not go to the safe. He did not go to the bank. He walked out to his old truck with empty pockets and a heart made of stone. The warehouse smelled of rusted iron and damp concrete. When Booker walked through the heavy metal doors, he saw his son. Darius was on his knees in the center of the room. His face was swollen, his expensive suit torn and covered in filth. He looked small, surrounded by 4 men who looked like they were carved from granite. One of the men stepped forward. He was holding a heavy steel pipe. He sneered at Booker, expecting to see a terrified old man clutching a bag of money. "You must be the father," the man said, spitting on the ground. "Your boy here owes us $50,000. He says you are going to pay us. If you do not have the money, we are going to start breaking him piece by piece." Darius looked up at Booker, his eyes pleading. "Dad, give it to them. Please, just give it to them." Booker ignored his son. He looked past the thug with the pipe. He looked toward the shadows in the back of the room where a man was sitting on a crate smoking a cigar. The smoke curled around his face, obscuring his features, but Booker knew him. He knew the way he sat. He knew the way he watched. "Hello, Sal," Booker said, his voice echoing in the large, empty space. The man in the shadows froze. He leaned forward into the light. It was Salvatore, a man who ran the underground of this city, a man whose name made grown men tremble. But when he saw Booker, his expression changed. It was not fear. It was recognition. It was respect. "Mr. Lewis," Sal said slowly, standing up. He signaled for his men to lower their weapons. "I did not know this was your boy." The thug with the pipe looked confused. "Boss, this guy owes us," Quiet Sal commanded. He walked over to Booker, extending a hand that was covered in heavy gold rings. Booker took it. The handshake was firm. "It has been a long time," Mr. Lewis, Sal said. "My mother still talks about the house you built for her. She says it is the only place in the world where she feels safe. She says the foundation you laid will last 100 years. I built it to last," Booker replied. "Just like I built my reputation." Darius watched in disbelief. He had spent his life thinking his father was just a simple laborer, a nobody who smelled of sawdust and sweat. He had no idea that in this city, among these people, Booker was a legend. He was the man who built sanctuaries for the most dangerous men in town. He was the man who never cut corners, who kept his word, and who commanded respect not with violence but with excellence. "Your son has made a mess," Sal said, looking down at Darius with disgust. "He borrowed money to play a rich man. He lied to us. In our world, that is a death sentence." "I know the rules," Booker said. "I did not come here to ask for charity, Sal. I did not come here to disrespect you by asking you to forget the debt. A debt must be paid." Darius let out a whimper. "Dad, what are you saying?" Sal looked at Booker with curiosity. "You do not have the money, Mr. Lewis. I can see it in your eyes. So how do you propose we settle this?" Booker looked at his son. He saw the soft hands that had never held a shovel. He saw the expensive shoes that had never walked through mud. He saw the weakness that he had allowed to fester by protecting him for too long. "He does not have money," Booker said, "and neither do I. But he has a body, he has 2 hands, he has a back that is strong even if his spirit is weak." Darius shook his head, his eyes widening in horror. "No, Dad, no!" Booker continued, his voice hard and unyielding. "Do not kill him, Sal. If you kill him, you get nothing but a body to bury. Make him pay you back. Send him to your construction sites." The room went silent. Sal looked at Darius, who was trembling on the floor, and then back at Booker. "You want me to put him on the crew?" Sal asked, a slow smile spreading across his face. "You want him to carry bricks. You want him to mix cement. Every dollar he owes you," Booker said. "Let him earn it. Minimum wage. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. If he stops working, you do what you have to do." "But until the debt is paid, he belongs to the job," Darius screamed. "You cannot do this. I am an executive. I am a businessman. I cannot work on a construction site. I cannot be a laborer. Dad, please just pay them. Sell the house. Do not humiliate me like this." Booker walked over to his son. He grabbed Darius by the collar of his ruined shirt and pulled him close. His eyes were burning with a fire that terrified Darius more than the gangsters ever could. "You humiliated yourself," Booker whispered. "You looked down on my work your whole life. You spat on the sweat that fed you. You thought you were too good to get your hands dirty. Now dirt is the only thing that will keep you alive." Booker released him and turned back to Sal. "Do we have a deal?" Sal laughed. It was a deep, dark sound. "I like this, Mr. Lewis. It is poetic. The boy who thought he was a prince will learn what it means to be a peasant." "Yes, we have a deal." Sal snapped his fingers at one of his men. "Get him up. Take him to the site at the docks. He starts at dawn. Give him a shovel." Two men grabbed Darius by the arms and hauled him to his feet. He was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the grime. He looked at his father one last time, hoping for a reprieve, hoping for a savior. "Dad, please," Darius begged. "Do not leave me here. Do not make me do this." Booker did not flinch. He looked at his son, and for the first time in years he saw a chance. Not a chance for wealth, but a chance for redemption. A chance for the boy to become a man through the crucible of hard labor. "Work hard," Darius Booker said. "It is the only dignity you have left." Booker turned and walked toward the exit. He heard Darius screaming his name echoing off the cold metal walls, but he did not stop. He walked out into the night air which tasted of rain and exhaust. He got into his truck and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He had saved his son's life, but he had done it by sentencing him to the very life Darius had spent 30 years running away from. It was a cruel mercy. But as Booker started the engine and drove away, he knew it was the only way. The fire of the furnace burns, but it is the only thing that turns soft iron into steel. Darius was about to enter the fire, and Booker prayed that when he came out on the other side, there would finally be something solid standing there. The glass walls of the conference room let in the morning light, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For years, this room had been a theater of intimidation, a place where Darius screamed at subordinates and made deals that hollowed out the soul of the company. Now it was silent. It was clean. Booker sat at the head of the table. He was not wearing the expensive Italian suits his son favored. He wore his simple work shirt buttoned to the collar, and his hands still bore the calluses of a lifetime of labor. Opposite him sat Nia. She was young, brilliant, and black. She had the kind of quiet intelligence that intimidation could not break. Darius had kept her in the basement of the corporate hierarchy. He had stolen her designs, claimed credit for her innovations, and mocked her ambition. He saw her as a threat. Booker saw her as the future. "You know why you are here?" Booker asked, his voice steady and low. Nia adjusted her glasses. She looked nervous, but she did not look down. "Because you are restructuring Mr. Lewis. Because you are firing the people who helped Darius ruin this place." Booker shook his head slowly. "No, Nia. I am here to build. I spent 40 years laying foundations with concrete and steel, but a company is not built of concrete. It is built of people." Darius tried to build with fear. Fear cracks. Fear crumbles. Booker slid a thick leather binder across the polished mahogany table. It stopped right in front of her. "Open it," Booker said. Nia opened the binder. Her eyes scanned the first page and her breath hitched. It was a contract. It was not for a manager position. It was for the role of chief executive officer. "You are giving me the company," she whispered, her voice trembling with disbelief. "I am not giving you anything," Booker replied sternly. "You earned it. You earned it every time you stayed late to fix Darius's mistakes. You earned it every time you stood your ground when he tried to belittle you. You have the vision, Nia. You have the integrity. And most importantly, you know what it feels like to be invisible. I need a leader who sees everyone." Nia looked up, tears shining in her eyes. "I will not let you down, Mr. Lewis." "I know," Booker said, standing up. "Now get to work. We have a legacy to rebuild." The months that followed were a whirlwind of restoration. Under Nia's leadership, the company did not just recover its sword. She stripped away the excesses. She fired the sycophants. She brought back the old crew, the men and women who knew the trade, who respected the craft. The quality of their work returned, and with it the respect of the city. The name Lewis Construction once again meant something solid, something true. But Booker did not stop there. He had one more debt to pay. He sat in his study, the room where Viola used to read to him, and looked at the incorporation papers for a new nonprofit organization. The Viola Lewis Foundation. It was not a vanity project. It was a promise kept. The foundation would provide scholarships for trade schools, helping young men and women from the neighborhoods where Booker grew up. It would give them boots, tools, and a chance. It would build the next generation of builders. Booker signed the papers with a flourish of his pen. He felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he had not felt since the day he buried his wife. He was turning the pain of the last few years into something that would outlast him. There was one final piece of business: the mansion. Booker drove up the winding driveway to the house. Darius had bought the house where the betrayal had happened. He parked his truck and looked at the imposing facade. It was a beautiful house, architecturally speaking, but to Booker it was a tomb. It was the place where his son had looked him in the eye and pushed him down the stairs. It was the place where greed had tried to murder love. He walked through the empty halls. The furniture had been sold, the art had been auctioned. The house was just a shell now echoing with the ghosts of arguments and lies. He stopped at the top of the staircase. He looked down at the spot where he had landed, where his body had broken, but his spirit had survived. He did not feel anger anymore. He felt a deep, quiet resolve. He walked out the front door and met the real estate agent in the driveway. She was a sharp woman who smelled of expensive perfume. "Mr. Lewis," she said, smiling, "we have several offers. A tech billionaire wants it. A foreign investor wants it for a vacation home. The numbers are very high." Booker shook his head. "No, I am not selling to them." The agent looked confused. "But sir, they are offering millions. Who do you want to sell it to?" "I am not selling it for a profit," Booker said, looking back at the house one last time. "I am selling it to the city." "The city?" the agent asked, her jaw dropping. "Yes," Booker said. "I have already spoken to the council. This house will not be a monument to a rich man's vanity anymore. It is going to be the new Viola Lewis Community Center for the elderly." He imagined the empty rooms filled with life. He imagined old men playing chess in the library where Darius used to plot his schemes. He imagined grandmothers knitting in the sunroom where Melissa used to drink champagne. He imagined laughter replacing the silence. He was scrubbing the stain of his son's sin from the walls and replacing it with service. "Whatever you say, Mr. Lewis," the agent said, clearly thinking he was crazy but respecting the steel in his voice. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. It was a crisp autumn morning. The leaves were turning gold and red, the air biting and fresh. Booker stood on the front steps of the new community center. A red ribbon was stretched across the entrance. A crowd had gathered. There were city officials, there were former employees, and there were the elderly residents who would now call this place their sanctuary. Booker gave a short speech. He did not talk about himself. He talked about Viola. He talked about the dignity of aging, the importance of community, and the duty of the strong to protect the weak. When he cut the ribbon, the applause was thunderous. It washed over him, cleansing him of the last residues of the war he had fought. After the ceremony, the crowd began to disperse, mingling in the gardens, enjoying the refreshments. Booker stepped away from the noise. He walked to the edge of the property, where a low stone wall separated the grounds from the street below. Across the street, there was a new construction site. It was a massive project, a new hospital wing going up. The air was filled with the sound of jackhammers, the beep of reversing trucks, and the shouting of foremen. Dust rose in choking clouds, coating everything in a fine gray powder. Booker leaned against the wall and watched. He saw the crew of laborers down in the pit preparing the foundation. They were mixing concrete, hauling heavy bags of cement, sweating under the midday sun. It was brutal, back-breaking work. The kind of work Booker had done for 20 years. His eyes zeroed in on one figure. The man was pushing a wheelbarrow, overflowing with wet, heavy concrete. He struggled with the weight, his arms shaking, his legs straining. He wore a neon yellow vest that was stained dark with sweat and dirt. He wore a hard hat that hid his eyes, but Booker knew him. It was Darius. He was thinner now. The soft paunch of the executive life was gone, replaced by the lean, ropey muscle of a laborer. His face was streaked with gray dust. He dumped the concrete into the form and paused for a second, wiping his brow with a dirty forearm. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving. The foreman shouted at him, "Hey, new guy, keep moving. We are not paying you to stand around." Darius flinched. He did not argue. He did not sneer. He did not threaten to sue. He simply nodded, grabbed the handles of the wheelbarrow, and turned back to the mixer. He looked up then, just for a second. His gaze crossed the street up the hill to where Booker stood. Booker did not look away. He stood tall in his suit, the owner of the empire, the man who had reclaimed his name. He looked down at his son. Darius stopped. He saw his father. He saw the community center behind him, the legacy of the mother he had betrayed. He saw the success he had tried to steal and lost. For a moment, the two men locked eyes. There was no hatred in Booker's face anymore. There was only a somber acknowledgement of reality. You reap what you sow. Darius looked down. He could not hold his father's gaze. The shame was too heavy. The weight of his own choices was pressing down on him harder than any load of concrete. He turned his back to the mansion. He turned his back to the easy life, and he pushed his shovel into the pile of gravel. Booker watched him work for another minute. He watched his son struggle. He watched him sweat. He watched him earn a dollar that was honest. It was hard. It was painful. But it was real. Booker turned away from the wall. He adjusted his jacket and walked back toward the community center where the sound of laughter and life was waiting for him. He had built a house. He had saved a company. And in the hardest way possible, he was saving his son. The empire had risen, and the balance of the world had finally been restored. The October rain fell in sheets, hammering against the roof of the black sedan and turning the city streets into rivers of gray sludge. Inside the car, the air was warm and smelled of leather and expensive cologne, but Booker felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. He sat at a red light, his windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. The rhythmic thumping of the wipers was the only sound in the car, a steady metronome marking the passing of time. Booker looked out the window. The world outside was a blur of distorted neon lights and hurried pedestrians with umbrellas turned inside out by the wind. On the corner there was a bus stop. It was little more than a plastic shelter crowded with people trying to escape the downpour. They were the working class, the people who could not afford to call a cab or drive a warm car. They were the people Booker had once been. His gaze drifted over the crowd, and then it stopped. Standing slightly apart from the others, oblivious to the rain that dripped from the edge of the shelter, was a man in a construction vest. The neon yellow fabric was stained with mud and cement. He wore heavy work boots that were caked in clay. In his hand he clutched a red plastic lunchbox, the kind you buy at a discount store for $5. It was Darius. He looked older. The last few months of hard labor had carved lines into his face that years of corporate stress never could. His shoulders were slumped not with defeat but with a kind of heavy exhaustion that comes from honest work. He was wet. He was cold. He was waiting for a bus that was running late to take him to a small apartment that he paid for with his own sweat. Booker felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. The instinct to help was ancient and deep. It was the instinct of a father who sees his child suffering. His hand moved toward the button to lower the window. He could call out. He could tell Darius to get in. He could drive him home. He could write a check that would make the cold and the rain go away. But his hand stopped. He remembered Viola's letter. He remembered the pain in his own chest when he woke up at the bottom of the stairs. He remembered the man Darius had been when everything was easy. If he opened that door now, he would not be saving his son. He would be unmaking him. At that moment, Darius looked up. He must have felt the weight of Booker's gaze. He looked through the rain and the traffic, and his eyes locked onto the black sedan. He saw his father. He saw the comfort he had lost. Booker braced himself. He expected Darius to run toward the car. He expected him to bang on the glass, to beg for a ride, to scream about the injustice of the rain. He expected the old Darius, the one who believed the world owed him a dry seat. But Darius did not move. He stood there in the mud, clutching his cheap lunchbox. The rain ran down his face, mixing with the grime of the job site. He looked at Booker, and for the first time in his life he did not look with envy or entitlement. He looked with recognition. Darius straightened his back, he lifted his chin, and then slowly, deliberately he nodded. It was a small gesture. It was a subtle movement of the head, but it carried the weight of 1,000 apologies. It was a nod of respect. It was a nod that said, "I understand now." It was an acknowledgement that he was where he belonged, and that Booker was where he belonged, and that the distance between them was necessary. Booker felt a lump form in his throat. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He looked at his son standing in the rain, a man being forged by the elements, and he nodded back. He did not smile. He did not wave. He simply acknowledged the man standing at the bus stop. The light turned green. Booker did not hesitate. He did not look back. He pressed the accelerator and the car moved forward, merging into the traffic, leaving the bus stop behind. As he drove away, he watched in the rearview mirror until the yellow vest was just a blur of color swallowed by the gray storm. Forgiveness had happened in that glance. But forgiveness did not mean restoration. It did not mean going back to the way things were. It meant accepting that the path forward had to be walked separately. Booker had saved his son's life, but he could not live it for him. 3 days later, the phone rang again. It was not Darius. It was the police. Booker listened to the officer's voice, his face impassive. When the call ended, he sat for a long time in his study looking at a photograph of Viola. Then he put on his coat and drove to the construction site. He found Darius on his lunch break sitting on a stack of plywood eating a sandwich from that red plastic box. When Darius saw Booker approach, he stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. He looked wary. He expected bad news. "Get in the truck," Booker said. Darius did not ask questions. He climbed into the passenger seat, bringing the smell of wet concrete and sawdust with him. Booker drove toward the city morgue. The silence in the cab was thick, but it was not hostile. It was the heavy silence of tragedy. "They found Ray," Booker said, keeping his eyes on the road. Darius stiffened. "Where?" "In an alley behind a liquor store on 4th Street," Booker replied, needle in his arm. He had been dead for 2 days before anyone noticed. It was an overdose. Darius let out a long, shaky breath. He turned his head to look out the window. He did not cry. He had spent all his tears on his own failures. This was just the final echo of a song that had ended long ago. "He always said he would die rich," Darius whispered. "He told me you were the fool. He told me you were a slave to the system. He said he knew how to beat the game. He lost the game," Booker said simply. When they arrived at the morgue, the air was cold and smelled of antiseptic. The medical examiner pulled back the sheet. Ray looked small. His skin was gray, his face gaunt and ravaged by years of addiction and bitterness. He did not look like a rebel or a genius. He looked like a wasted life. Darius stared at his biological father. He looked at the man who had whispered poison in his ear, who had taught him to hate Booker, who had planted the seeds of greed that nearly destroyed him. He saw Ray, not as a villain, but as a warning. This was the end of the road for those who took shortcuts. This was the final destination of arrogance. "Do you want the state to handle it?" the medical examiner asked, covering Ray's face again. "If no one claims him, he goes to the potter's field." Darius shook his head. "No. He was my father. I will bury him." Booker reached for his wallet. He was ready to pay. It was what he always did. He fixed things. He paid the debts. Darius put a hand on Booker's arm. It was a rough hand, calloused and strong. "No, Booker," Darius said, using his name with a new kind of reverence. "Put your money away." Booker looked at him surprised. "It will cost thousands, Darius. You do not have that kind of money." Darius reached into the pocket of his work pants. He pulled out a thick envelope. It was crumpled and stained with sweat. He opened it. Inside was a stack of cash. 10s and 20s mostly. It was not a fortune. It was weeks of wages. It was money earned from 12-hour shifts in the rain and the sun. It was money saved by eating cheap sandwiches and walking to work when the bus was late. "I have been saving," Darius said, his voice steady. "I was saving for a deposit on a better apartment. But this is my debt. He is my blood. I have to do this." Booker looked at the money. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It was not just currency. It was dignity. It was the first time in his life that Darius was paying for something real with money he had actually earned. "Okay," Booker said softly. "You handle it." Darius walked over to the clerk and counted out the bills. His hands were steady. He signed the papers. He arranged for a simple pine box and a plot in the public cemetery. He did not buy a marble monument. He did not buy a silk-lined casket. He bought what he could afford. The funeral was 2 days later. It was raining again. There were only 2 people at the graveside, Darius and Booker. There was no priest. There were no eulogies about what a great man Ray had been, because that would have been a lie. They stood in silence as the workers lowered the box into the wet earth. Darius picked up a handful of dirt. He crumbled it in his fingers, feeling the grit. He looked at the grave, and then he looked at Booker. "I thought I was like him," Darius said quietly. "For a long time I thought I was Ray's son and that I was just pretending to be yours. I thought his blood made me special." "Blood does not make you a man," Booker said. "Choices make you a man." Darius threw the dirt onto the coffin. It made a hollow thud. "I know that now," Darius said. "I am sorry it took me losing everything to figure it out." Booker put a hand on Darius's shoulder. He felt the muscle there hard and tense. He felt the strength of the man underneath the ruins of the boy. "You did not lose everything," Booker said. "You lost the things that did not matter. You found the only thing that does." They turned and walked away from the grave, leaving Ray behind in the cold ground. They walked toward the parking lot where Booker's truck and the bus stop waited. "Can I give you a ride to work?" Booker asked. Darius paused. He looked at the truck. It was warm, it was easy. Then he looked at his watch. "No thanks, Dad," Darius said. "The bus comes in 10 minutes. I bought a weekly pass. I do not want to waste it." Booker smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. "All right, son, don't be late. I won't," Darius replied. Booker watched him walk to the bus stop. He watched him stand tall in the rain. He watched him open his lunchbox and check his sandwich. He watched a man who was finally free. Booker got into his truck and started the engine. He drove away knowing that Viola was watching too. The empire had been saved, but more importantly, the family had been saved. Not by money, not by power, but by the hard, cold truth of a rainy day and the redemption of a dirty dollar. The snow fell softly outside the tall, arched windows of the Viola Lewis Community Center, turning the manicured gardens into a rolling sea of white. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cinnamon pine needles and roasted turkey. It was Christmas Eve. A year ago, this building had been a cold monument to ambition, a fortress of marble and glass where Darius had plotted and schemed. Now it was alive. It was warm. It vibrated with a kind of energy that money could never buy. Booker stood near the fireplace watching the room. The grand ballroom where Darius had once hosted stiff, uncomfortable cocktail parties for potential investors was now filled with long, folding tables covered in red and green cloths. There were no crystal chandeliers dripping with diamonds. Instead, strings of simple white fairy lights draped from the ceiling, casting a soft golden glow over the crowd. There were no senators here tonight. There were no tech moguls or banking executives looking for a tax write-off. The room was filled with the people who actually built the city. There were the foremen from the job sites, men with weathered faces and hands like sandpaper, who were laughing loudly over cups of hot cider. There were the administrative assistants, the cleaners, and the junior engineers who had survived the purge of the old regime. And there were the children. Dozens of them ran through the hall, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. They were the scholarship recipients of the Viola Lewis Foundation. They came from neighborhoods where hope was often in short supply, but tonight their eyes shone brighter than the lights on the tree. They wore their best clothes, ill-fitting suits and dresses that had been handed down, but they wore them with pride. Booker took a deep breath, letting the scene wash over him. For the first time in years, the knot of anxiety in his chest was gone. He was not looking over his shoulder, waiting for a betrayal. He was not worrying about stock prices or public image. He was simply present. Nia, the young CEO, walked over to him. She held a plate of food in one hand and a glass of punch in the other. She looked tired, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that comes from building something that matters. "You should eat Mr. Lewis," she said, nodding toward the buffet line where a local catering company run by two grandmothers was serving mountains of soul food. "I am fine," Nia Booker said, smiling. "I am full just watching them." Nia looked out at the crowd. "We had a record year, Booker. The company is profitable. The foundation is fully funded. We are building the new library downtown, and we are doing it under budget and ahead of schedule." Booker nodded. "I know. I read the reports. You are doing a better job than I ever did." Nia laughed, shaking her head. "I am standing on your shoulders, Mr. Lewis. We all are." She touched his arm gently, and then moved away to greet a group of young apprentices who looked at her with hero worship in their eyes. Booker moved through the crowd. People reached out to shake his hand or pat him on the back. There was no fear in their eyes anymore. When Darius ran things, the employees walked on eggshells, terrified of his temper and his caprice. Now they looked at Booker with genuine affection. He was not just the owner. He was the grandfather of this strange, beautiful family. He made his way to the front of the room. In the past, at events like this, there would have been a raised platform, a VIP section, where the elites separated themselves from the common workers. Darius had loved his thrones, his high-backed leather chairs that made him look like a king. Booker had ordered all of that removed. In the center of the room, facing the crowd, there was a simple plastic folding chair. It was white and scuffed. It was the kind of chair you found at a backyard barbecue or a church basement bingo night. Booker sat down. The plastic creaked slightly under his weight. It was not comfortable. It offered no lumbar support. It was not impressive. But as Booker settled into it, he felt a sense of authority that he had never felt in the boardroom. He looked around the room. He saw an old bricklayer showing a young boy how to tie a tie. He saw his former secretary dancing with her husband. He saw the portrait of Viola hanging above the fireplace, looking down on them all with her eternal gentle smile. This was his kingdom. It was not made of gold. It was made of service. It was made of second chances. His eyes drifted to the empty spaces in the room. He did not look for Tiffany. She had vanished as soon as the money dried up, disappearing into the city to find another host. He did not miss her, but his gaze lingered on the door for a fraction of a second. He was not waiting for Darius. He knew Darius would not come. He knew Darius could not come. The terms of their new understanding were unspoken but absolute. Darius was building his own life now, brick by brick. To bring him back here into the warmth of the empire he had forfeited would be to undo all the work he was doing. It would be an insult to the man he was becoming. But still, Booker was a father. And on Christmas Eve, the heart remembers what is missing. A group of children gathered around Booker's chair. They sat cross-legged on the floor, looking up at him expectantly. They did not know him as the tycoon or the ruthless businessman. To them, he was just Mr. Booker, the man who gave them books and boots. "Tell us a story," Mr. Booker, a little girl with braided hair, asked. Booker smiled. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What kind of story do you want to hear?" he asked. "A story about magic," a boy shouted. Booker chuckled. "Magic is just hard work that nobody sees," he said. "But I will tell you a story about a woman named Viola. She was a queen, but she did not wear a crown. She wore an apron, and she could turn a house into a home just by walking through the door." He told them about Viola. He told them about the early days, about the struggle, about the love that had sustained him when the world was cold. As he spoke, he felt her presence beside him, sitting in the empty space where a queen should be. The evening wore on. The food was eaten, the carols were sung, the snow outside fell harder, covering the tracks of the past in a pristine blanket of white. As the guests began to leave, buttoning up their coats and exchanging hugs, Booker remained in his plastic chair. The room grew quieter. The staff began to clear the tables, but they moved softly, respecting the peace of the moment. Booker reached into his pocket and pulled out his old phone. It was a simple model, not the latest smartphone. He checked the screen. There was a single notification. It was a text message. The number was familiar, but he had not saved it in his contacts. He had deleted the old contact, the one labeled Son. This was just a number now, a connection to a man who lived on the other side of the city in a small walk-up apartment. Booker opened the message. It was short. There were no emojis. There were no flowery explanations or requests for money. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Lewis," the message read. "Thank you for not saving me." Booker stared at the screen. The blue light illuminated his face in the dim room. He read the words again. "Mr. Lewis, not Dad." It stung a little, the formality of it. It was a scar that had not yet faded. But beneath the sting there was a profound swelling of pride. Darius had understood. By calling him Mr. Lewis, Darius was acknowledging the distance he had to travel to earn back the title of son. He was acknowledging that the relationship they had before, the one based on entitlement and enabling, was dead. And the second sentence, "Thank you for not saving me." It was the greatest gift Booker could have received. It was validation. It was proof that the pain of the last year, the destruction of the family image, the public humiliation, the terrifying risk of letting his son fall, had all been worth it. Darius was alive, not just breathing, but alive. He was waking up early. He was working hard. He was paying his own bills. He was burying his own dead. He was becoming a man. Booker typed a reply. His fingers were thick and slow on the small keypad. He did not write, "I love you," though he did. He did not write, "Come home," though part of him wanted to. He wrote the only thing that mattered, the only thing that would keep Darius on the path. "Merry Christmas," he typed. "Keep building." He pressed send. Booker watched the message status change to delivered. He put the phone back in his pocket. He sat back in the white plastic chair. He looked up at the portrait of Viola. Her eyes seemed to twinkle in the firelight. "We did it," Booker whispered to the empty room. "We saved him." He closed his eyes and listened to the silence. It was not the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of peace. The empire was safe. The legacy was secure. And somewhere across the city, in a cold apartment, a man was sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the just, preparing to wake up and build his own world with his own two hands. Booker Lewis, the patriarch, The builder, the father, sat on his plastic throne, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like a king. The years moved like the river that cut through the city, steady and relentless, washing away the debris of the past and smoothing the rough edges of memory. Booker Lewis lived his final chapter not in the shadows of scandal, but in the warm light of redemption. His hair had turned completely white, a crown of snow that commanded reverence wherever he went. He walked slower now, his knees stiff from decades of climbing ladders and kneeling on concrete floors, but his back remained straight. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had nothing left to hide and nothing left to prove. The Viola Lewis Community Center became his second home. He spent his mornings there, sitting in the garden he had planted, watching the elderly residents play chess or read in the sun. He knew them all by name. They did not know him as the tycoon who had almost lost his empire. They knew him as the man who fixed the leaky faucets himself because he did not trust the plumber to do it right. They knew him as the man who brought donuts on Tuesdays and listened to their stories about the old days. The company under Nia's steady hand had grown beyond Booker's wildest dreams. It was no longer just a construction firm. It was a standard. When people saw the Lewis sign on a job site, they knew the building would stand for 100 years. The name Lewis, once tarnished by Darius's greed, had been scrubbed clean. It shone like polished brass. Booker had regained his reputation, but more importantly, he had regained his sleep. The nightmares of falling down the stairs, of losing everything, were gone, replaced by the deep, dreamless rest of a man who has finished his work. Darius remained on the construction sites. He did not rise to the boardroom. He did not become a foreman immediately. He stayed in the mud. He learned the rhythm of the job. He learned how to frame a wall, how to pour a foundation, how to wire a house. He learned the difference between being a boss and being a leader. Over the years he aged. His hands grew rough and scarred. His face weathered by the sun, and the wind lost the softness of entitlement. He looked like his father. They saw each other occasionally. Sunday dinners were reinstated, but they were simple affairs. Booker would cook a pot roast or fry some chicken. Darius would come over wearing clean clothes but smelling of sawdust. They did not talk about business. They talked about the weather. They talked about sports. They talked about the quality of lumber at the yard. It was a quiet relationship built on the ruins of the old one, but the foundation was solid. There were no lies between them anymore. One evening, as the winter winds began to howl around the eaves of his modest home, Booker called his lawyer. It was time to settle the final account. He sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he had once counted pennies with Viola and laid out his papers. The lawyer was a young man, sharp and eager, expecting a complicated trust fund or a complex distribution of assets. He had the documents ready to transfer millions of dollars in stock and real estate. Booker pushed the papers aside. "The company stays with Nia Booker," said his voice raspy but clear. "She has earned it. She owns the majority share now. The rest of my holdings, the investments, the savings, they go to the Viola Lewis Foundation. Every cent. It will pay for scholarships for trade schools for another 50 years. The lawyer looked confused. "But sir, what about your son? What about Darius? Surely you want to leave him the bulk of the estate. He is your only heir." Booker smiled. It was a sad smile, but it was full of love. "If I give him millions," Booker said, "I will undo everything he has done for himself. I will rob him of his pride. I will turn him back into the boy who thought the world owed him a living. No, I will not do that to him." Booker reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. He wrote down a figure. It was not a fortune. It was a specific, calculated amount. "Leave him this," Booker said, sliding the paper across the table. The lawyer looked at the number. $30,000. "Sir, that is nothing compared to your wealth. That is the price of a used truck and some tools." "Exactly," Booker said. "It is enough to buy a good table saw. It is enough to rent a small garage. It is enough to buy his first load of wood. It is enough to start." He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment, imagining the future he would not see. "I started with a hammer and a dream," Booker whispered. "Darius has learned how to work for someone else. Now he needs to learn how to work for himself. I am leaving him the seed, not the harvest. If he wants a forest, he will have to plant it." The lawyer nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He drafted the new will. Booker signed it with a steady hand. He was not cutting his son off. He was setting him free. He was giving Darius the only thing of value he had left to give, the opportunity to be his own man. The seasons turned. Winter gave way to spring. Booker grew frailer. His breath came shorter, his heart beat slower. He spent more time in his armchair looking at the photos of Viola. He was not afraid of death. He saw it as a reunion. He had done his duty. He had protected the name. He had saved the boy. On his last day, the sun was shining through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Booker sat by the window watching the street. He saw a truck pull up. It was an old beat-up pickup. Darius got out. He walked up the path, his gait steady and strong. Booker watched him come. He saw the man his son had become, a man of substance, a man of earth and sweat, a man who could look himself in the mirror. When Darius entered the room, he saw the peace on his father's face. He sat beside him, holding Booker's hand. They did not need words. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of understanding. Booker looked at his son one last time. He squeezed Darius's hand, feeling the calluses, feeling the rough skin that mirrored his own. "Build it straight," Booker whispered, his voice barely a breath. "I will, Dad," Darius promised, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I will build it true." Booker closed his eyes. He heard the sound of a hammer in the distance, a rhythmic, steady beat. It sounded like a heartbeat. It sounded like life. He let go of the breath he had been holding for so long and drifted away into the light where Viola was waiting for him. He left behind a city built of stone and steel. He left behind a foundation that gave hope to the hopeless. But his greatest legacy was not the buildings or the money. It was the man sitting by his bedside, the man who would open an envelope in a few days and find a check for $30,000 and understand exactly what it meant. It was an invitation to start at the beginning, an invitation to build his own chair. A name is not given, it is built. A chair is not owned, it is earned. My stepson thought he could inherit my respect without inheriting my struggle. He learned the hard way that you cannot cut the roots and expect to keep the fruit. I did not destroy him, I simply removed the foundation he never built, forcing him to stand on his own feet. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving but taking away everything until only the truth remains.